I heard my daughter say I was ruining her life before I ever realized she had been quietly taking control of it. Claire thought I was asleep in my recliner when she whispered into her phone, bitter and sharp. If I have to keep doing this for nothing, I swear I'm done. I didn't move. I didn't speak. But by noon the next day, I had hired a private nurse, changed every password I could still reach, and cut off Claire's access to my accounts. The look on her face when her card stopped working at the pharmacy told me one thing, loud and clear. My daughter hadn't just been caring for me. She had been counting on me. If this opening touched something in your heart, let me know in the comments how you would have felt in my place. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always read your words, especially from women who have lived long enough to know that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. If stories like this speak to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. My name is Margaret Ellis, and until the winter, I fractured my hip. I had spent 3 years proving to myself that widowhood would not turn me into a ghost. I was 72 years old, living in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the same white clapboard house my husband Walter and I had bought when Claire was in middle school and Rachel still slept with a nightlight. Every room held some trace of us. Walter's reading glasses still sat in the top drawer of his nightstand, though he'd been gone long enough for sensible people to tell me I should have put them away. His favorite blue mug chipped at the handle still sat in the cabinet above the stove. I still reached for it without thinking when I made coffee, though I always caught myself before I set it on the table for him. That is the strange thing about grief when you get older. It doesn't roar all the time. It settles into your bones and becomes part of your posture. You learn how to stand around it. After Walter died, people watched me the way they watch a cracked porch step, waiting to see if it will finally give out. I understood their concern. We had been married 46 years. I had never lived alone. For the first few months, every silence in the house sounded unnatural. I would wake at 3 a.m. and listen for his breathing, then remember. Sometimes I would carry the laundry basket to our bedroom and stop in the doorway because the bed looked too wide and too neat, like a hotel room no one had truly stayed in. But I did not give out. I learned how to reset the breaker when the storm knocked the power out. I hired a young man from church to clean the gutters twice a year, and I paid him cash from an envelope in my desk like Walter used to. I kept up with the bills, took my own car to my doctor's appointments, clipped coupons, watered my hydrangeas, and attended the Wednesday Bible study only often enough to keep the women there from forming a rescue committee around me. I told myself independence was a habit, and habits could be protected. Rachel Monroe. My younger daughter called every Sunday afternoon from Richmond, sometimes more than once a week if work had chewed her up and she needed a softer place to land for a few minutes. She had her father's patience and my tendency to think before speaking, which made some people underestimate her. Claire Bennett, my older daughter, lived 40 minutes away in Cary and had always been the efficient one, the woman who knew which paperwork needed filing and which brand of paint held up best in humidity, and how to make a problem sound foolish for existing in the first place. Claire did not call as often as Rachel did. Claire arrived. She swept in with groceries, suggestions, and opinions that felt less like offerings and more like corrections. For years, that had seemed useful. Then came the fall. It was nothing dramatic. No ice storm. No cinematic tumble down a staircase. Just one dizzy moment in my kitchen early one February morning before breakfast, when I turned too fast from the sink with a kettle in my hand. The room tilted. My foot slipped. I came down hard on my left side against the tile. The pain arrived so fast and so bright it robbed me of breath. I remember the kettle rolling a thin metallic clatter that sounded absurdly cheerful for the kind of pain that makes you understand in a single instant that your body has become a dangerous place to live. My neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, found me after I failed to answer the back door when she brought over a casserole dish I had forgotten to return. The ambulance came, then the emergency room. Then the long, humiliating string of questions that accompany age in America as faithfully as a hospital wristband. Do you live alone, Mrs. Ellis? Who helps you at home? Have you had falls before? Do you feel safe returning home by yourself? I hated those questions more than I hated the pain medicine that made my tongue feel thick. I hated the implication beneath them. Not that I was hurt, but that hurt might be proof I should surrender the life I had been protecting. The fracture was not the worst kind, thank God, but it was enough to force reality into the room. I needed physical therapy. I needed help getting in and out of the shower at first. I needed someone to drive me for a few weeks, someone to keep an eye on the medication schedule, someone to stay overnight until I was steadier. Before I had time to decide how I felt about any of it, Claire had decided for me. "I'll move in for a while," she said from the foot of my hospital bed, already sounding like a woman solving a problem no one else had the competence to touch. "It makes the most sense. Rachel's too far away, and you cannot be alone right now." I remember looking at her then, at Rachel, who had driven down the minute she got my call and was standing beside the window with her coat still on. Rachel opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but Claire kept going. "I can work remote most days. I know your routines. I can handle the insurance mess. We need to be practical." Practical. Claire loved that word. She used it the way some people use scripture. Rachel stepped closer and touched my blanket. "Mom, whatever you want. I can come for a few days too. We can figure something out." But I was exhausted, embarrassed, and sore clear through my soul. Claire sounded certain. Rachel sounded tired. The doctor had used the phrase risk factors twice in 10 minutes. I did what women of my generation have done too often when cornered by urgency and guilt. I accepted the arrangement that would burden me least in the moment, even if I did not yet understand the cost. Claire moved in 2 days after I came home. At first, I told myself I was lucky. She stocked the refrigerator. She filled my pill organizer with color-coded precision. She set alarms on her phone for my medication and my exercises. She drove me to physical therapy and corrected the way I used my walker in parking lots, her hand firm at my elbow. Her voice clipped, but competent. When church friends called, she answered cheerfully and told them I was recovering well. When neighbors stopped by, she stood in the doorway with a bright, tired smile and said, "One day at a time." People praised her constantly. "You're a blessing to your mama," Mrs. Donnelly said. Claire smiled modestly. "Family takes care of family." I smiled too, because that was the sort of sentence people like to hear from daughters, and because I wanted very badly to believe it. But gratitude can be a blinding thing. The first oddity was small enough to dismiss. A stack of mail I kept on the hall table vanished before I had gone through it. When I asked about it, Claire said she had sorted the important things into the desk drawer in the den. "You don't need to worry about junk mail right now," she said. I laughed as if that settled it, but when I checked the drawer later, the envelopes were out of order. A utility bill had already been opened. So had a statement from my bank. The second thing was my pantry. Claire reorganized it while I napped one afternoon, moving the tea to a higher shelf I could not comfortably reach and replacing my usual brands with whatever she preferred, because, as she put it, "It's easier if everything runs one way." One way. Then it was my calendar on the refrigerator. A dentist appointment I had planned for March disappeared. Claire said she had canceled it because you do not need one more thing on your plate. She said it kindly enough. Almost. I began to notice how often she used that tone with me, the careful, patient voice people use with toddlers and difficult patients and elderly women. They have already decided no longer need full explanations. If I asked where my checkbook was, she would say, "I moved it somewhere safer." If I asked whether the pharmacy had called, she would say, "I took care of it." If I asked why the den lamp had been moved, she would sigh as if the question itself were one more burden she had nobly agreed to bear. Rachel called often sometimes while Claire was in the kitchen, banging pans around loud enough to register her opinion without having to speak it. "How are you really doing?" Rachel asked me one evening. "I'm managing," I said, because mothers have lied with those exact words since the beginning of time. There was a pause on the line. "And Claire?" I looked toward the kitchen. Claire was standing at the counter with my mail open beside her hand. "She's helping," I said. Rachel exhaled softly, not quite convinced. "Okay, just if you need me, tell me the truth." I promised I would. But after I hung up, Claire walked in with a glass of water and said too casually, "Rachel always gets to be worried without having to actually do anything, doesn't she?" I looked up at her. "She calls because she loves me." Claire smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Sure, it's easy to love from a distance." That was the first moment something cold moved through me. Not fear exactly. Not yet. Just the faintest sense that my illness had opened a door in this house, and that Claire had stepped through it with more than concern in her hands. There is a particular kind of humiliation that comes with needing help from your own child. It is not the obvious humiliation people imagine, not the walker by the bed, or the plastic pill case, or needing someone to stand outside the bathroom door in case your leg gives out. Those indignities are physical. They sting, but they are simple. What cut deeper was watching my own life slowly pass out of my hands while being told at every step that it was for my own good. By the third week after my fall, Claire had developed a way of speaking around me instead of to me. At my follow-up orthopedic appointment, she sat beside me in the exam room with a yellow legal pad on her lap like a woman preparing to negotiate a merger. When the physician assistant asked how my pain had been, I opened my mouth to answer, but Claire got there first. She has good days and bad days, she said smoothly. Mostly worse in the mornings, and she's still a little foggy from the medication. I turned to look at her. I'm not foggy. Claire gave me a little smile, almost indulgent. Mom, you forgot whether you took your pills yesterday. That was once I said. The physician assistant nodded with that professional expression doctors learn, the one meant to communicate patience without promising belief. I felt something hot and childish rise in my chest. I know what I took, I said. And my pain is manageable if I keep moving. Claire put a hand on my arm, then a small public gesture that looked loving to anyone watching, and felt to me like a lid being pressed down over a pot. She hates admitting when something hurts, she said. That sentence hung in the room longer than it should have. It told a story about me I had not agreed to tell, stubborn, unreliable, slightly diminished. The appointment went on. Claire asked most of the questions. Claire wrote down the instructions. Claire thanked the staff as she wheeled me out, though I was perfectly capable of walking with my cane. On the drive home, I stared out the passenger window at the winter trees stripped down to their bones and said nothing. Claire kept one hand on the wheel and sighed. You don't have to make everything harder. I turned my head slowly. Answering for myself is not making things harder. Claire kept one hand on the wheel and sighed. You don't have to make everything harder. I turned my head slowly. Answering for myself is not making things harder. Yes, it is, she said, not raising her voice. Because then I have to correct what you leave out. That was Claire's genius. She could say cruel things in such a reasonable tone that for a second you almost felt silly for hearing the cruelty at all. After that, I started noticing how often she did it. When the phone rang, she would reach it before I could. Margaret Ellis residence, she would say brightly, then listen, and often decide for herself whether I should even be bothered. Sometimes she would come into the den afterward and summarize the call in 3 dismissive sentences. It was just church people checking in. It was one of those insurance calls. It was Rachel again. I told her you were resting. Rachel again. There was always a texture to Claire's voice when she said my younger daughter's name. A dry little scrape of resentment she did not bother to hide anymore. Once I picked up the extension in my bedroom while Claire was already on with a woman from church. I had only meant to say hello. Instead, I heard Claire speaking in a softened murmur. She's having a harder time than she lets on, she said. Some days she gets confused. Nothing dangerous yet, but I'm keeping a close eye on things. I froze with the receiver in my hand. Confused. Nothing dangerous yet. It was such a careful phrase, so skillful. Not dramatic enough to be challenged outright, but strong enough to change how people would see me from then on. I hung up without speaking and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time afterward, my heart pounding with a kind of outrage that had nowhere to go. If I confronted her, she would deny the wording. Or worse, she would say she had only been trying to get people to understand how difficult things were. She always wrapped control inside concern. The house itself began to feel different under her management. My routines were no longer mine. Breakfast happened when Claire was ready for it. If I wanted toast at 9 instead of 8, there was an edge to her mouth. If I reached for the coffee tin, she would say, "You've already had enough caffeine today." If I lingered too long at the kitchen table, she would say, "You need to elevate your leg now." If I stood too quickly, she would appear at my elbow, not quite helping, more like steering. The worst part was how quickly a person can begin to doubt herself when someone else manages the rhythm of her days. One afternoon, I went looking for the folder where I kept our property tax records and homeowners insurance papers. Walter and I had always stored them in the bottom drawer of the buffet in the dining room. The drawer was empty except for table linens and a pack of birthday candles. I stood there frowning until Claire came in carrying a basket of laundry. "What are you looking for?" "The house papers." She shifted the basket to one hip. "I moved all of that." "Why?" "Because you don't need to be digging through files right now." I closed the drawer carefully. "Where are they?" "In a safe place." I turned to face her. "This is my house, Claire. I'd like to know where my papers are." Her expression changed just slightly, the way a sky changes before a storm. Nothing obvious at first, only a subtle withdrawal of warmth. "You're upset because you're tired," she said. "I'm trying to reduce stress for you." "No," I said. "You're deciding what I'm allowed to touch." She stared at me for a beat, then laughed, short and dry. "Mom, everything doesn't have to be a power struggle." It was one of those lines that leaves the other person trapped. If I argued, I became the difficult one. If I backed down, she won. I backed down, at least outwardly. But inside, a terrible awareness had begun to wake up in me. Not fully formed, not yet sharp, but there. Like the first sting in a sleeping foot before the blood rushes back. Rachel sensed it before I was ready to name it. She called on a Thursday evening just after Claire had gone to the grocery store. I was alone in the living room, with a blanket over my legs and an old movie half playing on television. "You sound tired," Rachel said. "I am tired, Mom." Her voice softened. "That's not what I mean." I looked toward the front window where dusk was gathering blue against the glass. With Rachel, silence had never felt like a threat. She waited through it. Finally, I said, "Claire's been handling a lot." "That's not what I asked." A laugh slipped out of me then, but it had no joy in it. "You always were your father's daughter. And you always dodge when you don't want to admit something hurts." That landed harder than she knew, because it echoed the exact story Claire had been telling about me. Only Rachel's version held tenderness instead of strategy. "I'm fine," I said, too quickly. Rachel did not answer right away. Then she said very carefully, "Are you still paying your own bills?" The question startled me so badly I sat up straighter. "Of course. Are you?" I looked toward the hallway, toward the den, where my desk sat toward the drawers that no longer held what I had always kept in them. "Mostly." "Mom." "She's helping," I said, and hated how weak it sounded. Rachel exhaled slowly. "Helping is not the same as taking over." Before I could answer, I heard Claire's car pull into the driveway. Gravel crackled under the tires. My whole body tensed in a way that felt ugly and revealing. "I have to go," I said. Margaret. It had been years since Rachel had used my first name. She only did it when she wanted to break through my defenses. I closed my eyes. "If you are uncomfortable in your own home," she said, "you need to tell me." The front door opened. Claire's footsteps crossed the foyer. "I'm managing," I whispered. Rachel went quiet for a moment. Then softly, "I don't think that's the same thing." After I hung up, Claire came into the room carrying 2 grocery bags and gave me a quick assessing glance as if checking whether I had done anything unauthorized in her absence. Was that Rachel? Yes. Claire set the bags on the coffee table with more force than necessary. Of course it was. I said nothing. She began unloading groceries, talking as she moved. It must be nice to play concerned daughter from another state. Call and ask dramatic questions, then go back to your own life while someone else does the work. That's unfair. Claire stopped and looked at me. Is it? Her face was flushed from the cold outside. There were shadows under her eyes. She did look tired. That complicated everything. Real exhaustion can make ugly feelings easier to excuse. I might have excused it again, if not for what happened 2 days later. I was in the hallway, returning from the bathroom, moving slowly with my cane, when I heard Claire's voice drifting from the kitchen. She was on her cell phone, speaking low, but not low enough. "No, I know," she said. I'm just saying the house will probably have to be sold eventually anyway. I stopped where I was. There was a pause while the person on the other end talked. Claire laughed a little. Well, somebody has to think ahead. Mom sure isn't. I stood very still, one hand braced against the wall. The house will probably have to be sold eventually anyway. Not if Margaret needs care and we're weighing options. Not I'm worried about her future. Not even I don't know what comes next. Sold. Eventually. Anyway. The words were practical in the way Claire liked best. Blunt enough to sound efficient, detached enough to hide appetite. I backed up before she could see me and made it to my bedroom with my heart thudding so hard it felt like a warning. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at Walter's old glasses in the nightstand drawer at the indent on his side of the mattress that had finally disappeared months ago. For the first time since my fall, the truth rose clear enough for me to touch. Claire was not only taking care of me, she was positioning herself around me. And somewhere beneath the schedules, the sighs, the opened mail, and the gentle corrections, my daughter had begun to imagine my life as something already half finished and my house as something waiting for its next owner. Once suspicion settles into your chest, it changes the texture of everything. A daughter opening the mail is no longer helpful. A moved checkbook is no longer tidying. A sigh is no longer fatigue. It all becomes evidence. I did not sleep much the night I overheard Claire talking about selling my house. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the soft, mechanical hum of it as it turned above me, and tried to reason my way back toward calm. Perhaps I had misunderstood. Perhaps she was talking about some distant hypothetical future. Perhaps I was letting pain and pride make me paranoid. That is the lie women like me have told ourselves for generations. We take a sharp little warning from our own instincts and wrap it in politeness until it suffocates. By morning, I was done suffocating. I decided I would not accuse Claire of anything until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. That meant I had to do something that felt almost ridiculous in my own house. I had to investigate my own life. The first test was the checkbook. I waited until Claire was upstairs on a work call, then went into the den with my cane and lowered myself carefully into Walter's old desk chair. The desk still smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. I opened the center drawer where I had kept our household checkbook for over 20 years. It was not there. I sat still for a moment, not because I was shocked anymore, but because I wanted to pay attention to the shape of the feeling. It was different from anger. Colder. Cleaner. I checked the side drawer, then the top file cabinet, then the wooden tray where I kept stamps, return address labels, and the good fountain pen Walter had given me on our 30th anniversary. Nothing. Claire appeared in the doorway before I heard her coming. "What are you doing?" she asked. I looked up calmly. "Looking for the checkbook." She crossed her arms. "Why?" "Because I'd like to see it. You don't need to worry about bills right now." That phrase again. Right now. As if my life had become a temporary emergency in which normal rules no longer applied. "I didn't ask whether I needed to worry," I said. "I asked for my checkbook." Claire's mouth tightened. I moved it. That phrase again. Right now. As if my life had become a temporary emergency in which normal rules no longer applied. "I didn't ask whether I needed to worry," I said. "I asked for my checkbook." Claire's mouth tightened. I moved it. "Where?" She shrugged, and there was something almost theatrical in it. "Somewhere safe." I held her gaze. "Safe from whom?" She laughed once softly, with no amusement in it. "Mom, honestly, you're acting like I stole it." I did not answer. That seemed to unsettle her more than any argument would have. Finally, she said, I've been paying the bills online. It's easier." My fingers tightened around the arm of the chair. "Since when?" "Since after your fall. You were overwhelmed." "Which bills?" "The normal ones. Utilities, insurance, pharmacy, groceries. It's easier." My fingers tightened around the arm of the chair. "Since when?" "Since after your fall. You were overwhelmed." "Which bills?" "The normal ones. Utilities, insurance, pharmacy, Groceries. I nodded slowly as though she had given me something useful. Then print me a list. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Because they are my accounts. That silence between us stretched 1 second too long. Then she rolled her eyes like a teenager being accused of leaving dishes in the sink. Fine, she said. Later. That silence between us stretched 1 second too long. Then she rolled her eyes like a teenager being accused of leaving dishes in the sink. Fine, she said. Later. But later never came. That afternoon, I looked for my debit card. I kept it in a small leather wallet inside my handbag in the hall closet. It was not there. There was a credit card, an expired rewards card from the grocery store, 2 lipstick tubes, and a folded tissue. No debit card. I stood with the bag open in my lap until my hands began to shake. When Claire came back from walking the dog, I asked as evenly as I could, "Where is my bank card?" She set her keys on the counter. I have it. Again, no apology, no explanation beforehand, just possession. Why? Because last time you almost dropped it at the pharmacy. I stared at her. You mean when you took it from my hand before I could put it back in my purse? She let out a short breath. Margaret, why are you doing this? There it was. Not mother. Not mom. Margaret. Claire only used my first name when she wanted to punish me without sounding openly disrespectful. I'm asking where my things are, I said. That is not doing anything. She opened the refrigerator and began rearranging containers inside it, the way she always did when she wanted to avoid looking directly at me. You're worked up for no reason. No reason. You've been edgy ever since Rachel got in your head. That stopped me. It was such a revealing sentence that for a moment I forgot to answer. Claire was no longer pretending this was about my recovery. She was framing concern itself as contamination. If I questioned her, it was because someone had gotten in my head, not because anything she'd done deserved questioning. My head is still my own, I said quietly. She shut the refrigerator door and turned. Then use it to realize I'm the one here every day. I should tell you something now that I was not ready to admit. Then guilt is a very effective leash. Claire knew exactly how to pull it. The minute she reminded me she was the one doing the work, I felt my anger tangle with shame. She was, in fact, driving me to appointments. She was cooking. She was cleaning more than I could. She was sleeping under my roof instead of in her own bed. That reality kept confusing the issue. It made me feel as though demanding answers was somehow selfish. So I changed tactics. Instead of confronting her directly, I began asking smaller questions and storing the answers. I asked about a grocery receipt I found in the kitchen drawer for over $300, including things I never bought. Energy drinks, expensive skin cream, frozen meals I disliked, and a bottle of wine I certainly had not been drinking while on medication. Claire barely looked at it. Household stuff? That much prices are high, Mom. You know that. I asked why the pharmacy statement listed 2 refills I didn't recognize. She said, one of them was mine, but I just used your card because I was already there. I was going to sort it out later. I asked why one of my magazines had stopped coming. She said I canceled a few things because your mail was piling up. I asked why the internet bill was higher than usual. She said, probably some annual adjustment. Every answer was quick, almost bored. Not detailed enough to verify, not dramatic enough to challenge without sounding petty. Claire had always known how to make other people feel unreasonable for wanting clarity. That evening, Rachel called. Claire was in the laundry room, and I lowered my voice instinctively, which shamed me more than I can say. How are you? Rachel asked. I looked toward the hallway before answering. Tired. Still, there was something in her voice, gentle but alert. Rachel had always been that way. She could hear strain the way other people hear thunder in the distance. Yes, I said. A pause. Then she asked, are you still handling your finances yourself? The question struck me hard because it landed right on the place I had been pressing with my own thumb all day. I tried to laugh. Why is everyone suddenly interested in my checkbook? Because Claire called me yesterday. My spine stiffened. She did. Rachel made a quiet sound of assent. She said you were having trouble keeping track of what was paid and what wasn't. She said maybe I should help convince you to let her take over more permanently. For a moment, I could not speak. More permanently. Not help for a season. Not support during recovery. Take over more permanently. What did you say? I finally asked. I said, if you wanted that, you'd tell me yourself. Something inside me softened at that. Only a little, but enough to make my throat ache. Rachel, I said, and then stopped. She waited. I hated what came next because it required me to say out loud what I had been trying so hard to contain. I think things are not right. Rachel did not rush in with questions. She never did. She gave me the dignity of finishing in my own time. She has my bank card, I said. She moved the checkbook. She's opening statements before I see them, and I overheard her talking about the house. Another pause, but this one felt heavy-focused. What exactly did she say? That it would probably have to be sold eventually anyway. Rachel exhaled slowly. Mom? Just that. My title in her voice, full of alarm and love. I know, I whispered. Do you feel safe? The question tightened every muscle in my body. Because up to that moment, I had been measuring the situation in irritation, disrespect, money, privacy. Safe belonged to another category entirely. I looked down at my hand, gripping the phone. She hasn't hurt me. That's not the only thing I'm asking. No, it wasn't. Do you feel safe being dependent on someone who keeps shifting the truth? Do you feel safe in a house where your own documents disappear? Do you feel safe with someone who talks about your future as if it already belongs to her? Before I could answer, I heard Claire's footsteps coming down the hall. I have to go, I said quickly. Margaret Rachel said, voice firm now. Listen to me. Do not sign anything. Nothing. And if she asks for account information, passwords, any of it, say no. My mouth went dry. Why would she ask for passwords? Rachel did not answer right away. Because if she's already testing your boundaries, she said carefully, the next step is usually paperwork. The laundry room door clicked open. Claire's steps came closer. I'll call you tomorrow, I whispered. After I hung up, I sat very still with the phone in my lap, while Claire came into the living room carrying a basket of folded towels. Was that Rachel again? Yes. Claire set the basket down and gave me a look I knew too well, cool, appraising, annoyed by something she could not yet name. What did she want? I met her eyes. To check on her mother. The muscles in Claire's jaw jumped once. Then she smiled, and that smile frightened me more than anger would have. Well, she said, I hope you told her I'm doing my best. I smiled back. And for the first time since my fall, I lied on purpose. I did, I said, but that night, long after Claire went to bed, I sat awake in the dark with Rachel's warning echoing in my mind. Do not sign anything. I thought about the checkbook, the debit card, the opened bank statement. I thought about Claire calling Rachel behind my back. I thought about the way she used words like permanently and easier and practical whenever she wanted me to surrender one more piece of myself. And then, as if the house itself wanted to strip away whatever denial I had left, I heard Claire laughing softly in her room with someone on speakerphone. A floor vent carried the sound. I'm just saying, she muttered, voice low and tired and ugly with resentment. If there's nothing left after all this, then what am I even doing? I stopped breathing. The other person said something I couldn't make out. Claire answered sharper now. I'm serious. I'm bathing her, feeding her, babysitting her schedule if she blows through everything before the end. What's the point? I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, one hand pressed flat against my chest. There it was. Not stress, not sacrifice, not daughterly frustration spoken in exhaustion. Calculation. Claire was not caring for me out of love and growing resentful in the strain of it. Claire was measuring the work against the reward. And in that moment, whatever softness remained in me toward her shifted into something harder, quieter, and far more dangerous. Resolve. The next morning, I called my lawyer before I allowed myself time to lose my nerve. His name was Daniel Harper, and he had handled Walter's estate after my husband died. He was not a dramatic man. He wore neutral ties, spoke in complete sentences, and had the kind of face people trust with Will's deeds and the quiet dismantling of illusions. If Walter had been alive, Daniel would have been the first person he called. So I called him myself. I waited until Claire drove to the pharmacy and physical therapy center to pick up my latest refill schedule. The second I heard the garage door lower behind her car, I took the cordless phone into my bedroom and shut the door. Harper and Lowe, the receptionist, answered. "My name is Margaret Ellis," I said, keeping my voice lower than usual. "I need to speak with Daniel Harper. It's urgent, and I would prefer it remain confidential." There was a brief pause. Then she said, "Of course, Mrs. Ellis. One moment." Daniel came on the line less than a minute later. "Margaret," he said warmly, "how are you healing?" "I need you to come to the house," I said. There must have been something in my tone because his own voice changed immediately, less social, more attentive. "Is something wrong?" "Yes," I said, "and I need to know exactly how wrong." He didn't waste time with reassurances. That was one of the things I appreciated about him. "Can you talk freely?" "For a few minutes." "All right." So I told him quietly and as clearly as I could about the missing checkbook, the debit card in Claire's possession, the opened mail, the bank statements, the comments about selling the house, and the phone call I had overheard in the night. Daniel did not interrupt until I finished. Then he asked, "Has Claire ever had legal authority over your accounts?" "Power of attorney." "Named access. Anything formal?" "No." "Have you signed anything since your injury?" "I don't think so." "You don't think so, or you haven't." I closed my eyes. "I signed discharge papers at the hospital. Some pharmacy forms. Insurance things, maybe." Claire put papers in front of me a few times when I was groggy. Daniel went quiet for a beat too long. "Margaret," he said finally, "I'm coming by this afternoon. Do not sign anything else. Do not give out passwords. And if possible, gather whatever bank statements, account information, and mail you can access before Claire returns." My hand tightened around the receiver. "Daniel, has she stolen from me?" He did not soften the answer, and I was grateful for that too. "I don't know yet," he said. "But from what you're describing, there are enough red flags that we should treat this as potential financial exploitation until proven otherwise." The phrase landed like ice water down my back. Financial exploitation. Not family tension. Not a misunderstanding. Not a daughter under stress. Exploitation. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, letting that phrase settle into the room with me. Then I got up and moved as quickly as my still healing hip would allow. The first place I checked was the desk drawer in the den where Claire had been tossing my opened mail after sorting it. I found utility statements, 2 credit card offers, a Medicare summary, and 3 bank envelopes already slid open. My name was on each one in that flat black print banks use to make everything look official and faintly threatening. I carried them to the dining room table one at a time, laying them out carefully like evidence in a trial I had not wanted to bring. At first glance, nothing looked catastrophic. The account balances were not emptied. The world had not collapsed in a single dramatic move. But as I read, line by line, a pattern began to emerge, and that was somehow worse. Small online transfers, repeated debit purchases at places I did not recognize, several grocery transactions larger than any I would normally make, 2 home supply purchases from a store Claire liked, a streaming service subscription I had never ordered, a payment to a cell phone company that was not mine. Individually, each charge might have been easy to explain away. Collectively, they formed a shape. Not emergency use, not one-time borrowing, habit. And habit, when attached to someone else's money, is a terrifying thing. I was still staring at the statements when the phone rang and made me jump so hard pain shot through my hip. It was Rachel. "Mom!" I must have sounded strange when I answered, because her tone sharpened at once. "What happened?" "I called Daniel Harper." "Good." The word came fast, without hesitation. Rachel did not waste energy pretending this might still be nothing. He's coming this afternoon, I said. I found statements. There are charges I don't understand. Rachel was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped into that calm register people use when they are frightened and trying not to pass the fear on. Do you want me to come? Not can I not. Do you need me? Do you want me? That nearly undid me. Not yet, I said, though part of me wanted to say yes immediately and let my younger daughter drive down and fill the house with the simple force of being believed. Let me see what Daniel says first. All right, but if you call, I'm on the road. After I hung up, I made one more call to a home care agency Daniel had recommended years ago for another church widow who had needed short-term help after surgery. I told the woman on the line that I wanted an in-home nursing assessment as soon as possible and asked that the appointment not be discussed with anyone except me. We can send someone tomorrow morning, she said. Yes, I replied. Please do. I had just written down the name Denise Carter when I heard Claire's car in the driveway. My body reacted before my mind did. I scooped the statements together, slid them into the yellow recipe folder on the table, and tucked that folder beneath a stack of placemats in the buffet drawer. When Claire came in carrying 2 pharmacy bags and an iced coffee, her face was flushed from the cold. You should have rested while I was gone, she said, seeing me in the dining room. I've rested enough. She set the bags down on the counter. I got your refill and talked to the therapist. They want you doing more balance work. Without thinking, I said, Did they talk to you or to me? Her eyes flicked to mine. Excuse me? Did they ask me? The silence between us shifted. Then Claire gave a short smile. Margaret, please don't start. There it was again. My first name like a reprimand. I almost said something then. Almost told her I knew. Almost demanded the checkbook, the debit card, the passwords, all of it. But anger would have warned her. Daniel had taught Walter that much years ago in a dispute with a contractor. Never show your hand before you know what's in the other person's deck. So instead, I said, What time is physical therapy tomorrow? Claire relaxed slightly. 10:30? I nodded as though that settled everything. Daniel arrived at 2:30. Claire had taken a work call upstairs, and I met him at the front door myself. He stepped inside, carrying a slim leather briefcase, and gave me one long, searching look. You don't look confused, he said mildly. Despite everything, I almost laughed. Come to the dining room, I said. Once we were seated, I showed him the statements. He put on his glasses and read them one by one without comment, occasionally making a small note on a legal pad. Then he asked for the names of my banks, the usual monthly bills, the last balances I remembered clearly whether I used online banking myself, and whether Claire had ever had access to my email. She helped me reset a password once after Walter died, I admitted. I think she may know more than she should. Daniel nodded grimly. He asked for my purse, then for my check register, then whether I still had the original deed records and trust paperwork Walter and I had stored. I told him some of the documents had been moved and watched something harden behind his eyes. After about 40 minutes, he leaned back slightly and folded his hands. All right, he said. Here's what I can tell you so far. I gripped the arms of my chair. These transactions are not random. Some are clearly household related, but several are personal or unrelated to your care. The pattern suggests Claire has been using your accounts as a convenience account at minimum, and possibly something more deliberate. He tapped one of the statements. These online changes here indicate the contact settings may have been altered. Notifications might have been routed away from you. My mouth went dry. Can she do that without permission? If she has access to enough information, yes. Legally, no. The room felt suddenly too warm. Daniel continued, voice even. The good news is, she does not appear to have formal authority. No power of attorney on record that I can see through the linked account notes you gave me. No authorized signer attached here. That means we can move quickly. Yes, today. I stared at him. How bad is it? He looked at me for a long moment before answering. Bad enough that if she were not your daughter, I would tell you without hesitation that someone with close personal access has been exploiting trust convenience and your temporary physical vulnerability. He paused. The dollar amount matters. But the method matters more. This is incremental, quiet, intentional. I thought I was prepared to hear it. I was not. The pain of betrayal is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives like pressure in the chest, a slow inward collapse of something you had not realized was still holding you up. I looked down at my hands on the table. They looked older than they had that morning. She was my child, I said, and hated how small my voice sounded. Daniel did not offer sympathy in the shallow way. He simply said, I know. That was worse somehow. Kinder. I swallowed hard. What do I do now? He opened his briefcase. First, we protect you. He took out a folder and laid out a list in front of me, neat and terrifying in its clarity. Freeze and replace bank access. Reset account credentials. Revoke pharmacy and medical pickup permissions. Secure estate and property records. Document all suspected misuse. Arrange professional care immediately. I stared at the list while the grandfather clock in the hallway ticked one steady second at a time. Somewhere upstairs, Claire laughed softly into a conference call. And downstairs in my own dining room, I realized the betrayal was no longer a feeling. It was a fact. The first thing Denise Carter did when she entered my house was look at me instead of at Claire. That may not sound remarkable to younger women, or to anyone who has never felt herself slowly being spoken over in her own life, but I noticed it immediately. Denise did not arrive with pity arranged on her face. She did not turn toward my daughter for the real answers. She stepped inside, set down her leather case, and said, Mrs. Ellis, I'm Denise Carter. Thank you for having me. Not thank you all. Not, and you must be the daughter doing everything. Just me. That alone steadied something in me. Claire, on the other hand, stiffened the moment she saw Denise on the porch. I had waited until breakfast to tell her. I kept my voice even and said, A nurse is coming this morning to do an assessment. Claire looked up from the toaster as though I had announced I'd invited a stranger to inspect the silver. A nurse? Yes. Why? Because I'd like professional support while I recover. The pause that followed was short, but it revealed far more than words. Claire's face went still in that way people's faces do when they are calculating faster than they can speak. That seems unnecessary, she said at last. I don't agree. Her mouth tightened. You already have support. Yes, I said. I do. That landed. She knew I had not said from you. Now Denise stood in my foyer in navy scrubs, her dark hair pulled back, her expression composed. She appeared to be somewhere in her 50s, with sharp, observant eyes, and the kind of calm posture that suggested she had spent years walking into tense homes and being expected to absorb whatever they contained. Claire recovered quickly and moved forward with one of her bright social smiles. I'm Claire Bennett, her daughter. I've been taking care of her full time. Denise shook her hand politely, then turned back to me. Mrs. Ellis, where would you like to sit while we talk? Claire answered before I could. The living room's easiest. Denise's gaze shifted to her not rudely, but with just enough pause to make the point. Thank you, she said. Then to me. Would that work for you? I almost smiled. Yes, I said. The living room is fine. We settled there with morning light falling through the front windows in pale strips across the rug Walter and I had bought 20 years ago. Claire sat on the edge of the armchair like a spokeswoman preparing to redirect a press conference. Denise opened her folder and began asking questions. Some were routine pain levels, mobility medication, schedule, sleeping habits. I answered them myself. A few times Claire jumped in anyway. She forgets to elevate her leg unless I remind her. She gets tired faster than she admits. She's had moments of confusion with the timing of her pills. Each time, Denise would make a note, then look back at me and ask, Is that how you'd describe it? Not is that true. Not oh dear. Just is that your description? And because she gave me the room to answer, I found that my own voice grew firmer with each question. I don't forget, I said. I resent being ordered. I was foggy the first few days after the hospital. I said, not now. I keep track of my medications perfectly well when they are actually left where I can see them. At that last one, Claire shifted in her seat. Denise's pen paused for half a second. Actually left where I can see them, she repeated. Claire gave a little laugh. She's upset because I organize things. Move them, I corrected. Denise nodded once, writing something down. Then came the walking assessment. Denise asked me to use my cane and walk the length of the hallway while she observed. Claire got up too quickly, hovering near my elbow. She'll need more help than she thinks, she said. But Denise held up a hand, gentle professional final. Let me see how Mrs. Ellis manages first. So I walked. I was not graceful. My hips still ached on longer stretches, and I could feel the stiffness in the first few steps. But I was steadier than Claire had led everyone to believe. I could rise on my own. I could balance at the console table and turn. I could walk without being steered like a shopping cart. When I made it back to the living room, Denise said, "Good, your recovery's moving better than I expected." Claire blinked. She has bad days too. I'm sure she does, Denise said evenly. But she presents as alert-oriented and more independent than some short-term post-fracture patients I see. That sentence changed the temperature of the room. Claire folded her arms. Well, you're not here at night. No, Denise replied. But I am here now. It was the sort of line that sounded perfectly harmless if you weren't listening carefully. I was listening. Half an hour later, Daniel Harper arrived. I had told Claire he was stopping by to review some documents while I'm recovering. That was true enough to stand up under scrutiny, though not complete enough to soothe her. When she saw him at the door, her expression flickered so fast, most people might have missed its surprise, first then alarm, then a smooth mask dropping into place. Daniel, she said, all polished cordiality. I didn't realize you were coming. He nodded politely. Claire, he came into the living room carrying a slim folder and a bank envelope. Denise stood to greet him, and I introduced them. Claire remained seated, though every line of her body looked braced. Daniel did not linger over niceties. He sat across from me, opened the folder, and said, Margaret, I brought the documents we discussed. Claire turned to me. Discussed? Yes, I said. Her eyes sharpened. When? Yesterday. I was here yesterday. Daniel answered before I could. Mrs. Ellis contacted me privately. Claire let out a small, disbelieving laugh. Privately. About what exactly? Daniel folded his hands over the folder. About her legal and financial affairs. The silence that followed was so tight, it felt almost audible. Claire looked at me as if I had committed some intimate betrayal. You called a lawyer behind my back. The question might have rattled me 2 weeks earlier. That morning, with Denise sitting quietly nearby and Daniel's steady presence across from me, it only clarified things. I did, I said. Why? Because you frightened me. Because you touched things that were not yours. Because I heard you measuring my life against its remaining value. Instead, I said, because I needed advice. Claire's voice sharpened. About me? Daniel spoke in the same calm tone he might have used discussing zoning permits. This conversation isn't helped by dramatics. Margaret has the right to review and change access to any account, medical or household arrangements connected to her own care. Claire turned toward him, color rising in her face. I have been taking care of her around the clock. And she is retaining professional care now, Daniel said. That hit. Claire looked back at me. What does that mean? It is a peculiar thing, taking your life back. People imagine it feels triumphant. Sometimes it does. But in that first moment, it felt more like standing up too quickly after sitting too long, dizzying, frightening necessary. It means, I said and heard my own voice settle as I spoke, that Denise Carter will be handling my care going forward. Claire stared. What? I've hired professional nursing support. For what? Claire snapped. You already have me? Yes, I said quietly. That is precisely the problem. Her mouth fell open. For a second, genuine shock stripped all performance from her face. Then anger rushed in to fill the space. You cannot be serious. I am. Claire stood up so quickly the armchair rocked behind her. After everything I've done, Daniel opened the folder and slid several documents onto the coffee table between us. Margaret is also making immediate changes to her account access pharmacy permissions and household payment profiles. Claire turned so fast toward him it was almost a whip crack. Excuse me, he spoke with maddening calm. Bank cards are being replaced. Online credentials are being reset. Existing convenience access is revoked effective today. Any medical pickup permissions not explicitly approved by Margaret are withdrawn. Future billing notifications will go directly to her and to legal counsel as authorized. Claire looked from him to me and back again, as though waiting for the moment someone would admit this was overblown theater. It did not come. You did this, she said to me, her voice low now, more dangerous. Yes. Without even talking to me, I felt something inside me go very still. I heard enough without talking. The words landed harder than I expected. Claire's whole expression changed. She knew then. Maybe not exactly what I had heard or how much, but enough to understand the ground beneath her had shifted. For the first time since my fall, panic flashed openly across her face. Not grief, not hurt. Panic. What exactly do you think I did? She demanded. Daniel answered before I could. That discussion can happen later if needed. Today is about protection and transition. Claire ignored him. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. Mom, this is insane. Margaret when she wanted to cut. Mom when she wanted to pull me back in. I did not look away. No, I said. What has been happening in this house is insane. Denise sat quietly through it all, but not passively. She was witness now. Claire knew that. So did I. Every interruption, every flash of anger, every attempt to redirect or shame me was being seen by someone trained to read family systems for a living. Claire must have realized it too, because she abruptly changed tactics. Her expression crumpled into wounded disbelief. So that's it, she said. You bring in strangers and a lawyer and treat me like some kind of thief. The room went still. I could feel my heart beating in my throat, but my voice remained level. If the shoe fits, I said. Her eyes widened. For one split second, nobody moved. The clock in the hallway ticked. A car passed outside. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator motor hummed on. Then Claire laughed once, a short, sharp sound with no warmth in it at all. You have got to be kidding me. No, Daniel said. She is not. He slid a final paper toward me and placed a pen beside it. Margaret, if you're ready, sign here to confirm the immediate revocation and replacement requests. My hand trembled slightly as I took the pen. Not from doubt, from the gravity of it, from understanding that a line once crossed cannot be uncrossed. I signed anyway. When I finished, Claire stared at the page as if ink itself had betrayed her. And then I saw it, the thing I would remember later over and over. Not sorrow that she was losing my trust. Not fear that she had hurt her mother. Only the raw, unguarded horror of a person watching control slip out of her hands. Claire did not leave that day with dignity. She left with fury. At first, after Daniel finished explaining the account changes and Denise gathered her assessment notes, Claire simply stood there in the middle of my living room, as if her mind had failed to catch up with the fact that the world had moved without her permission. Her face had gone pale under the flush of anger. One hand still gripped the back of the armchair so tightly that the knuckles had turned white. Then the disbelief cracked. You are humiliating me, she said. She wasn't looking at Daniel or Denise. She was looking directly at me, and for the first time since my fall, she wasn't bothering to hide the accusation and concern. I am protecting myself, I answered. No, she snapped. You are making me look like some kind of criminal after I gave up everything to be here. Daniel closed his folder with calm precision. No one has used the word criminal, Claire. Maybe not out loud, she shot back, whirling toward him. But don't insult me by pretending that isn't what this is. Denise stood quietly near the fireplace, her posture neutral, though I could tell from the set of her shoulders that she was alert. She had likely seen scenes like this before. That thought comforted me more than it should have. Claire turned back to me. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed? The old reflex rose in me before I could stop it, an instinct to soften, to acknowledge, to reassure. She was my daughter. I had once stayed awake through her fevers, sewn sequins back onto her dance recital costume at midnight, held her hair while she vomited after food poisoning, and driven 3 hours in a thunderstorm when she was 26 because she said she couldn't stop crying after her first husband left. Motherhood trains you to respond to distress, even when distress is wearing the face of someone hurting you. But another thought rose faster this time. If I comfort her now, I disappear again. So I kept my voice steady and said, yes, I do. And none of that gave you the right to take control of my life. Claire laughed, but it was a terrible sound, sharp, breathless, unbelieving. Control your life. She threw her hands up. You couldn't even get to the bathroom alone 3 weeks ago. The room went still. Daniel shifted slightly, and Denise's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. But it was I who answered. I needed help. I said. I did not need to be stripped. Something flickered across Claire's face then. Not shame, not quite. More like the realization that she had just shown too much in front of witnesses. So she changed tactics. That was one of Claire's oldest habits. When force didn't work, she pivoted to injury. She pressed a hand to her chest and let her eyes widen as though she were the one who had just been wronged beyond measure. Unbelievable, she said softly. After everything I've done, this is what Rachel and your lawyer and some nurse have convinced you to think about me. I almost answered. Daniel did instead. No one had to convince Margaret of anything. That sent Claire spinning toward him again. You don't know our family. No, Daniel said. But I know what account misuse looks like, and I know what coercive overreach looks like. I am seeing both. The words hit their mark. Claire's composure slipped entirely. You self-righteous little... She stopped herself only because Denise was standing there, taking in every second. Then she rounded on me again. Fine. You want to do this? Go ahead. Bring in strangers. Cut me out. See how long they stay when it stops being convenience. Her voice shook now, but not with sorrow. With rage. The kind that comes when a person who has grown used to access suddenly finds a lock where there used to be an open door. You think Rachel's going to swoop in and save you? Claire went on. She's not the one who has been washing your sheets and picking up your medication and listening to you complain every single day. I felt my face go hot. Denise's tone came cool and clean. That's enough. Claire turned on her instantly. This is none of your business. Denise held her ground. The moment you started speaking to your mother this way in front of me, it became relevant to my assessment. I will never forget the look Claire gave her then. Pure hatred, naked and undressed by manners. Then she picked up her purse from the side table and marched toward the front door. At the threshold, she turned back one final time. You know what she said to me? Don't call me when this all falls apart. The front door slammed so hard, the hallway mirror rattled. For a full 5 seconds, nobody spoke. Then very quietly, Denise said, Mrs. Ellis, are you all right? No one had asked me that all day except her. And the truth was, I didn't know. I felt sick. Not because I doubted the decision. I didn't. I felt sick because there is no clean way to survive the moment your child reveals that her love is entangled with appetite. Even when you protect yourself, something inside you still breaks. I will be, I said. Daniel looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Because this is the point where she will likely escalate in other ways. He wasn't wrong. By evening, the calls started. The first came from my cousin Linda in Greensboro, a woman I spoke to perhaps 6 times a year, unless there was a funeral or a wedding shower involved. Her voice on the phone had that strained brightness people use when they are pretending they're just checking in while very obviously fishing. Margaret, she said, I heard there was some confusion at the house today. The word confusion again. A careful word. A useful word. One Claire favored because it made everyone sound equally unreliable. What did you hear? I asked. Linda hesitated. Only that Claire's worried about you. She said you've been very upset and not yourself, and that some outside people are pushing you into big decisions while you're still recovering. Outside people. As though my lawyer of 10 years and a licensed nurse were shadowy figures off a daytime television warning segment. I sat down in the kitchen chair before answering. That is not what happened. Linda rushed in too quickly. Oh, I'm sure it's all just stress, honey. No, I said more sharply than I intended. It is not stress. Claire has been overstepping and I am correcting it. Silence. Then Linda gave a small, awkward cough. Well, I just hope everybody calms down. That was the problem with families. Too often they value calm over truth because calm is easier to serve at dinner. After I hung up, there was another call. Then another. An old church friend. A second cousin. A neighbor who had clearly heard a tidied-up version of events through Claire's social orbit. The details shifted slightly each time, but the frame remained the same. Margaret is confused. Margaret is being influenced. Margaret is lashing out because she's embarrassed about needing help. Claire is heartbroken after all she's done. By the fourth call, I understood exactly what Claire was doing. She was building a story before I could tell mine. It was, I realized with a chill, the same strategy she had used in smaller ways for weeks, answering for me at appointments, telling people I was foggy, describing me as confused before I could speak for myself. She had simply widened the circle. A smear campaign sounds melodramatic until it is happening to you. Then it feels horribly domestic. It arrives by way of concerned voices and unfinished sentences. It wears cardigans and says things like, "We only want what's best." It makes you feel tired before it makes you feel angry. By 7 that evening, I was both. Denise had stayed longer than scheduled to help organize my medications and make notes for the coming week. Before leaving, she handed me a printed care plan and said, "If Claire returns tonight and becomes aggressive, call me and call your lawyer. If you feel unsafe, call 911. The fact that she had to say that to me in my own home nearly made me cry. After she left, the house felt too large and too hollow. Claire had taken an overnight bag, some clothes, and her laptop. But much of her presence remained a cardigan hanging over the breakfast stool. Her expensive face wash by my bathroom sink. A mug with dried coffee at the bottom sitting beside the Keurig. It looked temporary, and that somehow made it worse, as though she might blow back in at any moment and restart the whole battle from the exact second it had paused. I was standing at the kitchen counter, staring absently at that dirty mug, when the phone rang again. This time, it was Rachel. I answered on the first ring. How bad, she asked, no greeting at all. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. How did you know it was bad? Because Claire called me 3 times in 1 hour, Rachel said. Then she texted me that you were having some kind of paranoid episode and being manipulated by opportunists. I closed my eyes. Did you believe her? I asked. Rachel was silent for half a beat, and then she said with such quiet certainty it almost broke me. Not for 1 second, that was it. That was all it took. I sank into the nearest chair and covered my eyes with one hand. The first sob escaped before I could swallow it. It embarrassed me instantly. But Rachel didn't rush to fill the sound with comfort or instructions. She simply stayed there on the line while I cried the way only exhausted women cry silently at first. Then with the ugly little gasps you thought age would teach you to avoid. I'm sorry, I whispered at last. No, Rachel said. You are not doing that. You do not have to apologize for being hurt. I laughed wetly through my tears. I feel ridiculous. You feel betrayed. That word sat between us plain and unsoftened. Yes, I said. Rachel's voice gentled. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about Denise, about Daniel, about the documents, about the way Claire's face changed when the access was revoked, about the relatives calling with worry disguised as suspicion, about the shame of hearing myself described as confused in my own community, about the way the house no longer felt like sanctuary but contested ground. When I finished, Rachel did not hesitate. I'm coming tomorrow. Rachel, you don't have to. I know, she said. I want to. I gripped the edge of the table. Your job can survive me taking 2 days off. My mother matters more. The tears came again at that quieter this time. I should have told you sooner, I said. Maybe, Rachel answered. But you're telling me now. That mercy undid me almost more than the loyalty. After we hung up, I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the old clock in the hallway mark each passing minute, and for the first time since this nightmare had started, I did not feel entirely cornered. Claire had moved first, loudly. She had tried to seize the story. She had begun telling the world that I was confused, paranoid, ungrateful. But Rachel was coming. Daniel believed me. Denise had seen enough with her own eyes. And beneath the grief, the humiliation, and the fury, something else had begun to rise in me. Not just anger now. Not just resolve. Witness. I was no longer alone inside Claire's version of events. And once other people begin to see what you have seen, the lie loses some of its power. Rachel arrived the next afternoon with an overnight bag, a laptop, and the expression of a woman who had spent 3 hours on the highway rehearsing calm. When I opened the door to her, something in me loosened so suddenly I had to grip the frame to steady myself. She stepped inside, set her bag down, and put both arms around me with a care that did not feel like management. She was careful of my hip without making a spectacle of protecting it. That difference alone nearly made me cry again. You should have called sooner, she murmured into my hair. I know. She pulled back and looked at me fully. Rachel had Walter's eyes steady and sad at the same time. No, she said. I mean, I'm sorry you felt like you couldn't. There are moments when being deeply understood hurts almost as much as being betrayed. Not because it wounds you, but because it reveals how starved you have been for gentleness. I led her into the kitchen. The house felt changed with her in it almost immediately. Not healed, not yet, but less hostile. Like someone had opened a window in a room that had held smoke too long. Claire had not returned after storming out the day before, though she had texted twice. The first message said, I need my things. The second said, I hope you're happy. I had shown both to Daniel, and he had advised me not to engage, except to coordinate pickup through a third party if necessary. That too felt surreal. Not because it was excessive, but because it was sensible. Rachel sat at the kitchen table while I made tea, then looked over at the stack of papers Daniel had left clipped together in a blue folder. Start from the beginning, she said. So I did. Not the whole beginning. She knew the fall, the recovery, the shift in Claire's tone. But this time, I gave her everything I had once edited for family peace. The missing checkbook, the debit card, the comments about the house, the late-night phone call, Denise's observations, Daniel's findings. Each detail, once spoken aloud, seemed less unbelievable than it had in my head, and more chillingly coherent. Rachel listened without interrupting except to ask precise questions. Which accounts changed? How many months of statements do you have? Did she ever ask you to sign something while medicated? Did she have access to your email password? Where are the house records now? That last question hung in the air. I'm not sure, I admitted. They were always in the buffet drawer. Then they weren't. Rachel sat back slowly. Okay, not panic, not denial. Just okay, which in Rachel's language meant, now we work. We spent the next 4 hours combing through my life. That sounds dramatic, but I mean it literally. We opened drawers, file boxes, desk folders, old plastic tubs in the hallway closet, the cedar chest in the guest room, and the steel lockbox Walter used for tax documents before we trusted ourselves enough to pretend a buffet drawer counted as security. Rachel set up her laptop at the dining room table and created neat little piles around it, as if conducting an audit for a company instead of her mother's unraveling family. Bank statements to the left, insurance records to the right, property papers in the center, a yellow legal pad for notes. She had inherited Walter's talent for making chaos look temporary. I found the first truly terrifying thing in a stack of papers Claire had shoved into a manila folder labeled medical. It was not medical. It was a comparative market analysis from a real estate agent in Cary. The top page listed my address in bold black print, the estimated value range of the house neighborhood sales trends, and suggested light upgrades that might increase buyer appeal. For a moment, I thought I had misread it. My eyes went over the address 3 times. "Rachel," I said. She looked up from the laptop, saw my face, and stood immediately. I handed her the paper without speaking. Her mouth tightened as she read. "This was in your house, in the medical folder." She flipped to the next page. There was an email printout clipped behind it. A woman named Tricia from a local real estate office thanking Claire for reaching out on behalf of your mother and saying she understood Claire was beginning to explore future options in case independent living becomes unrealistic. Future options. Independent living becomes unrealistic. The language was clean, plausible, and poisonous. Rachel looked up at me slowly. "Did you know about this? No. Did you ask anyone to evaluate the house? No." She lowered the pages very carefully, as if sudden movement might make the truth worse. "Mom," she was laying groundwork. I sat down because my knees felt unreliable. I had suspected greed. I had suspected opportunism. But this was structure. This was planning. Not the emotional flailing of a resentful daughter, but a methodical softening of the ground under my feet. Rachel went quiet in the way she did when anger sharpened, rather than exploded. Then she returned to the laptop and began typing. "I'm sending this to Daniel," she said. "Now." While she did that, I kept searching. In the second drawer of the hall table, tucked beneath expired coupons and instruction manuals for appliances I no longer owned, I found another folder. This one was cream-colored and heavier than the others. On the tab in Claire's handwriting was a single word: important. My stomach turned before I even opened it. Inside were forms. At first glance, they looked official enough to blur together dense print signature lines, notary blocks, healthcare language. My eyes snagged on one phrase and stopped. Durable power of attorney. I sat very still. Beneath that was another document related to financial management authority. Then a healthcare proxy form. Then a page marked instructions for execution. Some signature lines were blank. Some sections had sticky notes attached in Claire's neat handwriting. "Mom signs here. Initial here too. Need witness." My hands began to shake so badly the papers rustled. "Rachel." She turned, saw what I was holding, and crossed the room in 3 strides. Her face lost color as she read the title page. "Oh my God," I swallowed hard. "I don't remember signing these." "No," she said, quickly scanning the pages. "You didn't. These are unsigned. Thank God." But the relief came tangled with something darker. Unsigned did not mean harmless. Unsigned meant pending. She had been readying them, trying the language on for size, waiting for the right moment. Maybe waiting for one of my groggier days. Maybe waiting until enough people believed I was confused that a signature would pass without scrutiny. Rachel laid the papers flat on the table and took out her phone. "I'm calling Daniel," he answered on the second ring. Rachel put him on speaker and summarized what we had found with the clipped precision of someone holding anger on a short leash. The real estate analysis. A short leash. The real estate analysis. The realtor email. The power of attorney packet. The sticky notes. There was a silence on Daniel's end long enough to make the aro feel colder. Do not discard anything. The realtor email. The power of attorney packet. The sticky notes. There was a silence on Daniel's end long enough to make the room feel colder. Do not discard anything, he said finally. Photograph every page. Scan and send immediately. Put originals in a separate folder and keep them out of the house if possible. Out of the house, I repeated. Yes, he said. At this point, I do not want any sensitive documents left accessible if Claire still has entry or knows where things are typically stored. I looked toward the front hall as if expecting my older daughter to appear there with her key in the lock. She still has a house key, Rachel said, voicing the thought. Daniel's tone sharpened. Change the locks. The practicality of it stunned me. Change the locks. Not someday. Not if she calms down. Now. Part of me wanted to protest. That's my daughter. We don't change locks against our children. But another part, the part that had been growing louder since the night I heard her talk about the value of caring for me, only if something was left answered back clearly. Then perhaps we should have expected better from our children. I'll arrange it, Rachel said. After we hung up, neither of us spoke for a while. The house seemed to hold its breath with us. Finally, I said, "How long do you think she'd been planning this?" Rachel leaned against the table, arms folded tightly across her middle. Long enough to have moved from resentment into logistics. That sentence settled into me like a stone. Not resentment alone, logistics. There is a difference between feeling entitled and building paperwork around your entitlement. The first is ugly. The second is dangerous. We spent the evening documenting everything. Rachel scanned the forms and the realtor packet. I made a written list of every incident I could remember: opened mail, missing card, pharmacy control statements, moved comments, overheard relatives contacted. Denise emailed her assessment notes to Daniel's office with my consent. By dinner, the dining room table looked less like a family gathering place than a command center. And still, one question kept circling in me like a vulture. What if I had signed? What if Claire had put those papers in front of me after pain medication, telling me they were just hospital forms or insurance follow-up? What if I had trusted her one more time? What if Daniel had not come? What if Rachel had believed the story Claire was spreading? What if Denise had answered to Claire instead of to me? Women my age spend so many years being told not to be difficult that sometimes we do not notice danger until it has nearly acquired letterhead. That night, Rachel slept in the guest room, and I lay awake in mine, listening to the unfamiliar silence of a house without Claire's footsteps. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like the stillness before a storm fully breaks. Because now, we knew. Claire had not merely dipped into my accounts because she was stressed. She had not simply gotten bossy because caregiving was hard. She had not drifted into overreach by accident. She had explored the sale of my home. She had assembled legal authority forms. She had begun telling people I was confused. She had been building a pathway toward control. And once a person shows you that they are willing to plan around your vulnerability, there is no going back to the comfort of misunderstanding. By the time I finally fell asleep, one truth had rooted itself so deeply in me I knew it would never leave. I had not almost lost some money. I had almost lost the legal right to my own life. The hardest truths are rarely the newest ones. By the time Rachel and I uncovered the real estate packet and the unsigned power of attorney forms, I could no longer pretend Claire's behavior had appeared out of nowhere. The scale of what she'd done was new. The brazenness of it was new. But the emotional roots of it, those reached far back, curling through years I had not examined honestly enough. That is one of the privileges of youth. You can move quickly, argue loudly, storm out, and still believe time will smooth things over before any damage hardens. Age is less generous. At my stage of life, once you begin tracing a wound backward, you know you are doing it because some cost has finally become too high to ignore. The morning after Rachel found the paperwork, I sat with a blanket over my knees in the sunroom Walter had added 10 years before he died. He built it because he said I deserved a room just for morning light. In spring, the hydrangeas out back always looked bluest from that room. In winter, it held every kind of silence. Rachel sat across from me with a mug of coffee warming her hands. She had asked no questions for nearly 20 minutes. She knew me well enough to sense I was turning towards something difficult on my own. Finally, I said, "I think part of this is my fault." Rachel's eyes lifted slowly. "Mom." "I don't mean that I made Claire do this," I said quickly. "I mean, I ignored too much for too long." Rachel didn't contradict me. She simply waited. So I began where mothers often begin when they are trying to understand one child without betraying another in memory. Claire had come into the world 6 years before Rachel, red-faced and furious as though being born had inconvenienced her. Even as a girl, she liked control. She lined up her crayons by color and got upset if anyone borrowed the wrong one. She corrected teachers in class not to be cruel, but to make sure things ran properly. At 12, she reorganized my kitchen drawers without asking, and was genuinely confused when I told her it had upset me. But it makes more sense this way, she had said, as though sense itself should settle the matter. Walter used to call her our little foreman. Sometimes he meant it affectionately. Sometimes he did not. Rachel, on the other hand, arrived softer in the world. Not weak, never weak, but she observed before she moved. She was the child who would sit under the dining room table during family gatherings and listen to the adults instead of clamoring for attention. She remembered people's moods. She noticed things that had not been said aloud. When Claire demanded, Rachel absorbed. That difference shaped our family more than I ever admitted. Claire took up space so forcefully that we all adjusted around her. It wasn't always unpleasant. There is comfort in a child who seems certain of herself. She volunteered for responsibilities, handled logistics, remembered deadlines. When Walter's blood pressure first became a real concern, Claire was the one who researched cardiologists and arrived with a legal pad of questions. When my sister got divorced and had to sell her house quickly, Claire was the one who said, "Here's what needs to happen first," and somehow made crisis feel sortable. Families reward competence, especially in daughters. We call it strength. We lean on it. We let it stand in for kindness longer than we should. Rachel learned a different role. She learned how to soothe, how to retreat from conflict, how to be the easier child. Not because she lacked opinions, but because there was little oxygen left once Claire entered a room with hers. I see that now with a shame that reaches bone deep. At the time, I told myself Rachel was simply independent, simply lower maintenance, simply less interested in the daily grind of family logistics. What I did not ask was whether she had learned that quietness was the price of peace. Walter saw more of this than I did. Once when the girls were in their 20s, he said to me in bed one night, "You let Claire bulldoze because she makes you feel looked after." I remember turning to him offended. "That's not fair." He looked up at the ceiling fan turning in the dark. "It's also not wrong." At the time, I dismissed it. Walter loved both girls fiercely, but he had a special tenderness for Rachel because he recognized in her a kind of emotional self-erasure he had once spent half our marriage helping me unlearn in myself. He worried that Rachel would always be mistaken for fine simply because she did not shout. Claire, meanwhile, mistook usefulness for moral authority. The older she got, the more she tied her identity to being the one who handled things. In high school, she kept a running account of who did what around the house. In her first marriage, she spoke constantly about carrying the emotional and practical labor for both herself and her husband. Even after that marriage ended, she described relationships in terms of who was pulling weight and who was dead weight. There was always a ledger in Claire's mind. Not necessarily of money, at least not at first, but of effort sacrifice and what she believed sacrifice entitled her to. That ledger had history with me. After Walter died, I leaned on Claire more than I should have, not because I loved her more than Rachel, but because she was closer, louder, and quicker to step in. She came over with casseroles. She made calls. She corrected people when they offered advice I hadn't asked for. She filled the house with motion at a time when I could barely make myself clear a dinner plate. Rachel came too, but she did it differently. She sat with me, folded laundry, listened, asked if I wanted company or silence. There were no performances of labor in Rachel's care, and because of that, I think I undervalued it. That is another painful truth women of my generation sometimes have to face. We were trained to admire the daughter who steps up in visible ways, even when those ways come with control attached. I think Claire started believing proximity gave her a claim, I said, quietly. Rachel looked down into her coffee. Maybe she always thought that. I studied her face. You knew, Rachel gave a sad little smile. Not like this, but yes, some version of it. She set the mug down carefully. Mom, do you remember my engagement dinner? The one at the Italian place after Daniel proposed. I searched my memory and nodded. Rachel had worn a navy dress. Claire had arrived late and criticized the restaurant lighting before she'd even sat down. She drank too much wine, Rachel said. And at one point, she leaned across the table and told me, It must be nice to get all the sentiment while I'm the one who's always expected to do the real work. I stared at her. She said that Rachel's smile didn't change, but her eyes did. You were in the bathroom. Dad had gone to settle the check. It was just the three of us for a minute. A wash of guilt moved through me so suddenly I had to look away. Why didn't you tell me? Rachel shrugged one shoulder. Because it was my engagement dinner and I didn't want to turn it into Claire's feelings. Because I thought maybe she was drunk and angry and embarrassed to be alone again. Because honestly, Mom, I didn't think you would really hear it. That landed exactly where it should have. Because she was right. Back then, I would have defended Claire by interpreting her. I would have said she was stressed, sensitive, feeling left out, acting out of pain. And all of that might even have been partly true. But interpretation, when overused, becomes permission. I see that now. I thought she was strong, I said. Rachel's gaze softened. She is strong. Yes, I said, but I confused strong with trustworthy. That was the heart of it. Claire had always been effective, efficient, decisive. The child who could be counted on to get things done. And because that relieved me, I gave her too much moral credit for it. I treated dominance like evidence of reliability. I let her interruptions pass as competence. I let her sharpness pass as stress. I let her resentment pass as overwork. Every time I excused it, I helped build the woman who now believed my vulnerability was a system she had earned the right to manage. Rachel sat quietly for a while after that. Then she said, I need you to hear something too. I looked up. This did not happen because you loved Claire wrong. The tears came before I could stop them. Not loud this time, just a slow spilling over. She used your trust, Rachel said. That's on her. I nodded, but grief is never that obedient. Part of me still wanted to travel back through every year and alter some tone, some response, some family script. Ask Rachel more. Challenge Claire earlier. Notice the entitlement while it still looked like personality instead of threat. But age gives you another kind of wisdom too, if you let it. Not absolution, never that, but clarity about where responsibility begins and ends. Claire's old wounds might explain her hunger. They did not excuse her choices. She may have believed she was owed something for years of showing up. She was not owed my house. She was not owed legal power over my body or my accounts. She was not owed the right to reduce me to a burden and then bill me emotionally for the privilege. As the light shifted in the sunroom, Rachel rose to refresh our coffee. I watched her move through my kitchen with a gentleness that asked permission from the room instead of imposing itself upon it. And I felt a different kind of grief than the grief of realizing how often quiet love is overshadowed by louder need. When she returned, I said I should have seen you more clearly too. Rachel smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. You're seeing me now. Yes. And perhaps that was the only honest place left to begin. Because what was happening with Claire was no longer just a legal problem or a financial one. It was the final eruption of patterns that had lived in our family for decades. Not caused by one moment, not solved by one confrontation. Built by temperament, grief, favoritism, where there should have been balance. Silence, where there should have been naming. The danger now was real and immediate. We still had documents to secure locks to change legal steps ahead. But for the first time, I understood the emotional architecture of the disaster. Claire had not simply become greedy when I got hurt. My injury had opened a door onto resentments, comparisons, and private ledgers she had been keeping for years. And I, in my hunger for peace and my gratitude for visible competence, had failed to stop her long before she reached for my accounts. That realization did not weaken my resolve. It purified it. Because once I understood that this betrayal had roots, I stopped waiting for it to make emotional sense. Some family wounds do not need to be fully explained before they are finally firmly confronted. Claire came back on a Sunday afternoon carrying tulips. If I had not known her as long as I had, I might have admired the elegance of the move. They were pale pink, tied with cream ribbon from the grocery store florist. The kind of flowers adult daughters bring when they want a scene to begin softly. She wore a camel coat, light makeup, and the expression of a woman who had cried just enough to make her eyes look vulnerable without becoming blotchy. She had always known how to present herself for sympathy. Even as a girl, when she wanted leniency from a teacher, she somehow managed to look both wounded and exceptionally responsible. Rachel was in the den, working remotely when the doorbell rang. She glanced toward the front window, saw Claire's car in the driveway, and her whole body tensed. "Do you want me here?" she asked. I considered that. Part of me wanted a witness. Another part wanted no audience for whatever remained between my older daughter and me. "Stay nearby," I said, "but let me answer." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. When I opened the door, Claire looked at me, and for one dangerous second, all my old instincts leapt toward her. She looked tired, genuinely tired. The kind of tired that changes the skin around the mouth, that drains color from the face in a way makeup cannot fix. "Mom," she said softly. The word landed differently from Margaret. Softer, more familiar, more treacherous. I stepped aside and let her in. She held out the tulips. I thought these might cheer up the house. "Thank you," I said, taking them. My voice was polite enough to belong to strangers. Claire glanced toward the hallway. "Is Rachel here?" "Yes." Her mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, I led her into the kitchen rather than the living room. The kitchen had become my ground again. The living room still held too much of the confrontation from the week before, too much of Daniel's folder and Denise's quiet witnessing and the sight of Claire losing control. The kitchen at least still smelled like coffee and dish soap and ordinary mornings. Claire sat at the table and folded her hands in front of her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I arranged the tulips in a pitcher because I wasn't willing to turn my back long enough to go searching for a vase. When I finally sat down across from her, she had already arranged her face into sorrow. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "That would be a refreshing change." Her eyes flickered. The old Margaret would not have said that. I saw her register the difference. "I deserve that," she said quietly. "At least some of it. Not all of it. Some of it. A careful beginning." I waited. Claire drew in a breath and looked down at her hands. "I've had a few days to think." I almost smiled at the phrase. A few days to think, as though contemplation had produced this visit instead of the fact that her access to my money, my medications, and my home had been cut off. Still, I let her continue. "I was overwhelmed," she said. "I know that's not an excuse, but it's true. I was exhausted. I was scared. You fell and suddenly everything was on me, and Rachel got to be the compassionate one from a distance while I was handling all the ugly parts. There it was. The old family ledger already opening on the table between us. I kept my expression neutral. "Go on." She looked up, then, perhaps expecting interruption, perhaps hoping the mention of sacrifice would already be working on me. When it didn't, she adjusted. "I'm not proud of everything I said," she went on. "Some of it was ugly. I know that. But I need you to understand that I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to keep things from falling apart." That was the closest Claire ever came to confession when she was still bargaining with reality. She never moved directly toward the truth. She circled it, naming stress instead of motive, pressure instead of choice. "What exactly do you think almost fell apart?" I asked. She stared at me for a moment, then let out a shaky breath. "Everything. My schedule, my marriage, my finances, my health. I was doing too much, and nobody seemed to care. A piece of me did care. That was what made this so difficult. Claire had not invented the strain. Caregiving is exhausting. Managing another person's recovery can strip patients clean off the bones. There are daughters all over America being quietly crushed under the weight of parents' jobs, spouses, and their own fear of becoming unnecessary. I knew that. I felt it in my chest as she spoke. But compassion is not the same as surrender. You could have said that, I replied. "I did say it," she snapped too quickly. Then just as quickly, she softened again. "Maybe not well, but yes. I said I was struggling." "No," I said. "You complained. You manipulated. You opened mail that wasn't yours. You moved my documents? You took my bank card. Claire flinched at the bluntness. I was trying to help. You were trying to control. Her chin lifted. That's not fair. No. I leaned forward slightly. Then tell me why there was a realtor analysis in my house. The question hit like a slap. For the first time since she walked in, Claire's carefully managed expression cracked open. Not into grief. Into calculation. Her eyes darted once toward the doorway, then back to me. I was just gathering information. For what? In case we needed options. The word hung there. Claire swallowed. Mom, you are injured. You live alone. It's not irrational to think ahead. Without telling me, I didn't want to upset you prematurely. That answer was so practiced I knew she'd rehearsed it. I stared at her for a long moment. And the power of attorney forms. Color rose high in her cheeks. I never had you sign them. No, I thought. Only because you ran out of time. That was not my question. She looked down. Daniel made it sound worse than it is. Did he? I printed them because I was trying to understand what would happen if you declined again. That's all. That's all. As if legal authority over my finances and healthcare were comparable to clipping a recipe. I folded my hands to keep them from shaking. Claire, you were preparing to take control of decisions that belong to me. No. She looked up sharply. I was preparing in case you couldn't handle them. Shaking. Claire, you were preparing to take control of decisions that belong to me. No. She looked up sharply. I was preparing in case you couldn't handle them, and who decided I couldn't? She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence between us lengthened. Finally, she said more quietly, I borrowed some money. There it was. Not a confession, another reduction, but closer. How much? A few things here and there. How much? Her jaw tightened. I don't know exactly. You knew exactly enough to do it more than once. She looked away. I always meant to pay it back. The words scraped across me. How many daughters and sons have hidden behind that sentence while quietly treating an aging parent's life as a reserve account? You also told people I was confused. Claire's eyes flashed. Because you were acting paranoid. No, I said. I was noticing. Her whole face changed then. The softness disappeared. The wounded daughter mask dropped for one dangerous instant, and I saw the old Claire, the one who could not bear losing narrative control. You don't know what it was like, she said, voice low now. You have no idea what it costs to be the one everybody leans on. Before I could answer, Rachel stepped into the doorway. I think she has some idea, she said. Claire's head snapped toward her. Were you listening? Rachel crossed her arms. You were loud. Something fierce and ugly flashed through Claire's expression. This doesn't concern you. Rachel almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. You used Mom's accounts, contacted a realtor about her house, started legal paperwork behind her back, and told half the family she was mentally declining. It absolutely concerns me. Claire stood so abruptly, the chair legs scraped the floor. Easy for you to say. You weren't the one doing the work. There it was again, that accusation she polished like silver, as though repeating it long enough would turn it into moral permission. Rachel didn't flinch. No, Claire, I wasn't here every day, but I also wasn't treating our mother like an investment. The words landed clean and hard. Claire stared at her stunned, and in that exact moment, Denise called. The timing was so strange it almost felt providential. I answered on speaker without thinking. Denise's calm voice filled the kitchen. Mrs. Ellis, I wanted to update you about next week's therapy schedule, and I should also let you know someone called the agency earlier, asking for details about your care plan. My whole body went still. Rachel looked at me. Claire looked at the floor. Who? I asked, though I already knew. Denise paused. A woman identifying herself as your daughter. She said she was the decision maker for your case and needed to review your services. The room chilled. I did not look at Rachel. I did not need to. I could feel her stare on Claire like a blade. Denise continued. We did not release anything, of course. I thought you should know. Yes, I said slowly. Thank you. I'm very glad you told me. After we hung up, silence roared through the kitchen. Claire would not meet my eyes. So this was her apology. Flowers in one hand, the agency in the other. Tears on her face. Another attempt at control already underway. Not repentance. Strategy. Something inside me, something maternal and tender and dangerously forgiving, died completely then. Get out, I said. Claire looked up sharply. Mom? No. My voice came out clearer than I felt. Do not call me that while you are still trying to manage me behind my back. Her face whitened. I said, get out! Rachel stepped fully into the room now, not threatening, simply present. A line beside me. Claire looked from one of us to the other, perhaps still searching for an opening, some old guilt to pull some softer version of me to wake back up. She found none. This is unbelievable, she whispered. No, I said. What's unbelievable is that you walked into my home pretending to apologize while still trying to pose as my authority. Claire picked up her purse with shaking hands. Fine. She moved toward the door, then turned back one last time, as if the right final line might still salvage her position. But nothing came, because the performance was over. I stood in the kitchen watching her leave, and what I felt was not triumph. It was something harder, quieter, and truer. I was done confusing tears with remorse. Daniel insisted on a family meeting. At first, I resisted the idea. What's the point? I asked him over the phone on Tuesday morning. She'll lie, or cry, or twist everything until I'm the villain again. Yes, he said, possibly all three. That doesn't exactly recommend the experience. His voice remained as calm as ever. No. What recommends it is clarity. Daniel wanted one controlled conversation with witnesses present before any further legal escalation. Not because he believed Claire would suddenly become honest in the glow of reason, but because people reveal themselves most completely when facts close in, and an audience prevents them from rewriting the moment later. Denise agreed to attend as a professional witness to what she had observed in the house and to the call from Claire impersonating my decision-maker. Rachel would be there. Daniel would guide the conversation. And I, he said, deserved one room in which the truth could be placed on the table, rather than whispered through other people's phones. So I agreed. We held the meeting in my dining room on Thursday afternoon, the same table where Walter and I had hosted Thanksgiving dinners and birthday cakes, and one awkward Easter when Claire and Rachel were both in college and pretending not to resent each other. Rachel sat at my right. Daniel sat at the far end with a thin stack of folders laid out in front of him. Denise sat slightly apart, composed and observant in a navy blazer instead of scrubs this time, as if to remind everyone she was not there as hired help, but as a professional. Claire arrived 10 minutes late. That, too, was a strategy. Claire had always used timing as a way of reclaiming control. If she entered a room late enough, everyone else was forced to feel her arrival. She came in wearing a fitted black sweater, a serious expression, and a leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm, as though she too intended to present a case. Her eyes moved around the room, quickly taking stock. Me, Rachel, Daniel, Denise, the folders, the water glasses I had set out. Because I am, to my own irritation, still the sort of woman who remembers water glasses, even when preparing for emotional war. Wow, Claire said, looking at Denise. You really brought an audience? No, I answered. I brought witnesses. Something flashed in her face, but she sat down without replying. Daniel began. Thank you for coming, Claire. I'll be direct. We are here because Margaret has raised serious concerns regarding unauthorized financial access, inappropriate interference in her care and communications, and preparatory legal activity conducted without her informed knowledge. Claire leaned back in her chair and gave a brief, incredulous laugh. That sounds dramatic. Daniel did not blink. That does not make it inaccurate. He opened the first folder and removed several documents. I'll walk through each category. If you have something factual to clarify, you may do so after I finish each section. Claire folded her arms. You're treating me like I'm on trial. No, Rachel said coldly. You're finally being asked not to interrupt. Claire shot her a glare, but said nothing. Daniel began with the bank activity. He laid out copies of statements showing repeated debit purchases, online transfer changes, and charges unrelated to my care. He highlighted the grocery and retail transactions that aligned with Claire's spending patterns rather than my own. He pointed out account notification changes and the absence of any formal authorization granting Claire financial control. Claire's responses came exactly as he'd predicted in layers. First, denial. I used her card a couple of times by accident because I was juggling 100 things. Then minimization. It wasn't a big amount. I wasn't draining her accounts. Then justification. I was doing everything for her. Things got mixed together. Daniel listened to each without argument, then simply placed the next piece of paper on the table. A printed summary of the transactions grouped by type and date. A receipt trail. The pattern, once organized, became difficult to shrug off. That was one of Daniel's gifts. He did not need to raise his voice. He let the paperwork do the humiliating. Then he moved to medical and household interference. He described my reports of missing documents, opened mail, changed routines, and Claire speaking for me at appointments. Denise then spoke for the first time, her tone calm and free of drama. In my assessment of Mrs. Ellis, she said, she presented as alert-oriented and capable of expressing preferences regarding her own care. I also documented a later call from a woman identifying herself as her daughter, who stated she was the decision-maker for Mrs. Ellis and requested confidential details regarding services. No such authority had been confirmed. Claire's head snapped toward her. I was trying to understand what was happening. Denise met her gaze without blinking. You represented yourself as holding decision-making authority. Claire opened her mouth, then shut it. Daniel moved on to the real estate inquiry. He slid the market analysis and the email from the realtor into the center of the table. Margaret did not request this, he said. Did you? Claire stared at the pages and made the first truly dangerous mistake of the afternoon. She smirked. Not long, not dramatically, just a brief, brittle lift at the corner of her mouth, as if being asked to defend herself on that point was somehow beneath her. I was exploring options, she said. For whom, I asked. Her eyes met mine. For you. Without asking me. You were not thinking clearly. Rachel's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she straightened. Careful, she said. Claire ignored her and pressed on. Perhaps sensing that her best remaining strategy was to sound more adult than all of us. Mom living alone after an injury at your age is not exactly a fantasy plan. Someone had to think ahead. I looked at her for a long moment. And you appointed yourself that someone. She rolled her eyes. Because no one else was doing it. That was when Rachel spoke again, and the entire room shifted. What do you think I was doing when I called every week? She asked. Claire let out a sharp breath. Please, calling is not the same as showing up? No, Rachel said. It isn't, but showing up doesn't give you ownership. What do you think I was doing when I called every week? She asked. Claire let out a sharp breath. Please, calling is not the same as showing up. No, Rachel said. It isn't, but showing up doesn't give you ownership. Claire turned toward her fully now, all pretense of restraint thinning. Easy for you to say. You got to be the sweet one, the loving one, the one who gets praised for concern while I handled reality. Rachel's face remained steady. Reality didn't require you to position yourself to sell Mom's house. Daniel wisely cut in before the two of them could explode. Finally, he said, drawing out the last folder there, is the matter of the unsigned power of attorney documents found in the house. Claire, can you explain why these were printed, annotated with signature notes, and stored among Margaret's household papers? He laid the forms down, one by one. Durable power of attorney. Healthcare proxy. Signature tabs. Sticky notes in Claire's handwriting. This time, Claire did not even pretend surprise. She stared at the papers, then at me, and I saw the calculation happen in real time. She was deciding whether denial was still possible. It wasn't. So she pivoted to what she must have believed was her strongest defense. I was trying to protect this family, she said, voice low and deliberate now. If Mom declined further, somebody would have needed authority. I was being proactive. Without discussion, Daniel said. She was medicated half the time. She was forgetting things. She was emotional. I felt a pulse of rage so clean it almost felt like peace. I was grieving and injured, I said. Not incompetent. Claire turned toward me, exasperation breaking across her face. Mom, you don't even hear yourself. You've been spiraling for weeks. No, I said. I have been waking up. Something feral flashed in her expression then. Daniel, perhaps sensing the room approaching a point of no return, said Claire. I'll ask you directly. Did you believe you were entitled to use Margaret's resources or position yourself to manage her affairs without informed consent? The question hung there like a blade, and in the silence that followed, everything true about my daughters became visible. Claire looked from Daniel to me to Rachel. Her breathing had become shallow. Her hands were tightly clasped, knuckles pale. She could still have chosen humility then. Not full confession, perhaps. People like Claire rarely leap straight into genuine contrition, but some form of retreat, some acknowledgement of overreach, some appeal to stress, some fragment of shame. Instead, she looked at Rachel and said, "Of course she'd love this." The whole room froze. Rachel frowned. "What?" Claire laughed softly, bitterly. "This. Me getting dragged through the mud while you sit there playing saint. You always did get the soft part of Mom." I turned sharply toward her. Claire. But she was past hearing tone now. Once resentment finds oxygen, it often prefers fire to rescue. "She doesn't want my side," Claire said, gesturing toward me. "None of you do. She wants a villain because then she doesn't have to feel guilty about leaning on me for years." The words hit like stones, because buried inside them was a twisted sliver of truth. I had leaned on Claire. I had let convenience and proximity obscure fairness. But Claire was wielding that history not as pain, but as permission. Rachel's voice came out very quiet. "You really think this is about me wanting something from her?" Claire met her eyes. "I think you're enjoying being the good daughter for once." Rachel's voice came out very quiet. "You really think this is about me wanting something from her?" Claire met her eyes. "I think you're enjoying being the good daughter for once." Rachel stared at her for a second that seemed to stretch forever. Then she said the sentence that broke the room open. "I don't want a single extra dollar from Mom. Not one. I would sign it today if that's what it took. I want her safe. That's all." Silence. Not because the sentence was dramatic, but because it was pure. Daniel didn't move. Denise didn't blink. I felt my throat close. And Claire, my oldest child who had spent weeks turning effort into leverage, had no answer ready for a love that wasn't bargaining. She looked for the first time cornered not by paperwork, but by contrast. And I knew with a certainty that ran deeper than anger that whatever happened next, this meeting had already done what it needed to do. The truth was no longer scattered in private phone calls and missing drawers. It was sitting in the center of my table where everyone could see it. After Rachel said she wanted nothing from me except my safety, something in Claire snapped clean in two. Up until that moment, she had still been performing. Not gracefully anymore, but deliberately switching between offense and injury, stress and justification, hoping one version of herself would finally gain traction. But Rachel's words stripped the room of the currency Claire understood best. If this was no longer about inheritance, no longer about who got what, then Claire could not balance the ledger in her favor. And when some people lose the ability to manipulate the story, they stop managing themselves. Claire laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was thin and brittle and edged with something close to contempt. "Of course you'd say that," she told Rachel. "That's easy to say when you've always been the sentimental favorite." "Claire," I said. But she was no longer speaking to be understood. She was speaking to wound. Rachel stayed still, one hand flat on the table. "This is exactly what I mean. You turn everything into a competition. Claire's face flushed dark pink. Because it was always a competition, Rachel. You just got to pretend it wasn't. No, I said sharply. Enough! But enough had come too late. Claire turned toward me so fast, her chair legs scraped hard against the floor. No, Mom. Actually, no. Since we're all being honest now, let's be honest. The room seemed to tighten around those words. Daniel straightened slightly, but did not interrupt. Denise sat very still, the kind of stillness professionals use when they know a person is walking toward self-exposure, and the wisest thing is to let them keep walking. Claire pointed at Rachel without looking away from me. She got your heart. I got your chores. Rachel's face changed, not dramatically, but enough that I saw the old wound land. Not because it was fully true, because it had been true enough in moments to leave a mark. Claire, I said again, quieter this time, but she barreled on. When Dad got sick, who handled appointments? Me. When the roof leaked after that storm, who was here? Me. When your car battery died in the church parking lot, who drove over me? Rachel got phone calls and tearful conversations and all the nice emotional parts. I got the labor. You got trusted, I said. She barked out a laugh. Trusted? Is that what you call it when people dump everything on you because they know you'll handle it? Rachel leaned forward. Nobody dumped anything on you. You grabbed it. That hit? Claire's head snapped toward her. You have no idea what I carried. No, Rachel said, voice steady and low. I have a very good idea. I just didn't decide that carrying things meant I owned people. The silence after that felt electric. Claire looked around the room as if seeing enemies everywhere now. Daniel with his folders, Denise with her calm witness face, Rachel with her refusal to take the bait, me with my hands folded so tightly in my lap my fingers ached. And then Claire said the thing I think she had believed for years but never dared speak in front of all of us. Well, someone should have owned this house, she said, or at least had some security from it. My stomach dropped. Daniel did not move. Rachel went completely still. Even Denise's expression changed, not outwardly, but enough that I saw the judgment settle in her eyes. Claire seemed almost relieved once the sentence was out. She paced a step away from the table, then another, talking faster now. I'm 50 years old. My marriage is shaky. My bills keep climbing, and I spent years showing up for this family while Rachel got to stay distant and noble. So yes, maybe I thought the one person who actually does the hard part shouldn't end up with nothing. There it was. Not confusion, not stress, not misunderstanding. Entitlement. I felt oddly calm as I listened, not because it didn't hurt, because the hurting part had already happened. This was just revelation now. You thought caregiving entitled you to my home? I asked. Claire whirled toward me. I thought sacrifice should count for something. It does, I said, in character. She scoffed. That's easy to say from the paid-off house. The cruelty of it landed harder than the volume. Not because she was discussing the house, because she had reduced my life with Walter, 46 years of work, mortgage payments, repairs, disappointments, shared plans, birthdays, funerals, tax seasons, and ordinary Tuesdays into a piece of desirable real estate she had begun to view as overdue compensation. Rachel stood up then. You need to stop. But Claire was fully gone now, past the point where shame could still retrieve her. Why, she shot back. Because it sounds ugly. It is ugly. You know what else is ugly? Being the daughter everyone relies on until there's something worth inheriting, and suddenly, I'm a villain for expecting not to be left scrambling. Daniel finally spoke. No one is entitled to a parent's property in exchange for access or care. He said, each word clipped and precise. What you are describing is not sacrifice. It is transactional coercion. Claire laughed bitterly. Please spare me the legal sermon. Denise's voice entered the room, cool and firm. What I've heard today is a daughter equating her there's vulnerability with leverage. Claire laughed bitterly. Please spare me the legal sermon. Denise's voice entered the room, cool and firm. What I've heard today is a daughter equating her mother's vulnerability with leverage. Claire rounded on her. You don't know anything about us. Denise did not flinch. I know enough. That seemed to enrage Claire more than if Denise had shouted. She turned back to me and for the first time let the softer masks fall away completely. You know what the truth is, she said. The truth is, you liked needing me. It made you feel safe. You let me handle everything when it suited you, and now that it's inconvenient, suddenly I'm manipulative. You know what the truth is? She said. The truth is, you liked needing me. It made you feel safe. You let me handle everything when it suited you, and now that it's inconvenient, suddenly, I'm manipulative. That sentence struck somewhere complicated because part of it touched a truth I had already faced. I had leaned on her. I had confused her efficiency with goodness. I had let her step too far, too often. But there is a difference between acknowledging your blindness and accepting blame for another person's choices. I did trust you, I said. That was my mistake. What you did with that trust was yours. Claire's eyes filled then, but not with remorse, with furious disbelief that I still would not bend. You have no idea what it feels like to be me. That was when something sharp rose in me at last, not screaming, not wild, but unmistakably fierce. No, I said, and you clearly have no idea what it feels like to hear your own daughter discuss your life like a burden and your home like a payout. The room went silent. Claire's breathing was uneven now. She looked from me to Rachel and back again, as though searching for someone to break rank and rescue the version of events that still left her righteous. No one moved, so she did what wounded, cornered people sometimes do when they can no longer win the argument. She tried to scorch the earth. Dad would have understood me better than you do, she said. The sentence sliced through me so fast I actually inhaled. Walter. She had brought Walter into it. Maybe she knew it would hurt most. Maybe she had stopped caring what she hit. Either way, it worked. For one terrible second, I saw my husband in the hospital bed 2 years before he died, hand thin in mine, telling me quietly to be careful how much of myself I surrendered just to keep peace with people who confuse love and claim. Rachel gasped softly. Claire, stop. But Claire was trembling with the momentum of her own cruelty now. He always knew you leaned on me more, she said. Maybe because deep down he knew Rachel was never really going to be the dependable one. Rachel went white. That did it. I stood. My hip protested a bright flare at my side, but I barely felt it. Enough! The word cracked through the room louder than anything I had said in months. Claire stopped. Maybe because of the volume. Maybe because it was the first time in her life she had heard that tone from me and understood instantly it was not bluff. I took one step toward her. You will not speak about my husband that way in this house, I said. My voice was low now, but every syllable felt carved. You will not insult your sister to justify what you've done, and you will not stand here and explain your greed to me as if it were devotion. Claire stared at me stunned. I kept going. You are not welcome in this home anymore. The words dropped one by one, heavy and final. Her mouth opened. Mom. No. Listen carefully, because this is the last time I will say it in person. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel Rachel's presence like a wall at my side, Daniel and Denise holding the silence behind me. You are not to enter this house again without explicit permission. You are not to contact my care providers. You are not to represent yourself as my decision maker anywhere ever. If you need to retrieve belongings, it will be arranged through Daniel. And until you seek serious help and show some shred of accountability, you are no longer part of my daily life. Claire's eyes widened in something that finally resembled fear. You're kicking me out. No, I said. I am protecting myself from you. For a moment, I thought she might collapse into tears or rage or another frantic defense. Instead, she just stood there, breathing hard, staring at me as though I had become someone else entirely. Maybe I had. Because the mother who would once have softened for the sake of family peace was gone. In her place stood a woman who had finally heard enough truth to stop bargaining with it. Claire picked up her portfolio with shaking hands. Fine, she whispered. Then louder, with all the venom she had left, "Enjoy your little courtroom." She turned and walked out. This time, no one followed. The front door closed. Not slammed, just shut. And in the quiet that followed, I felt something strange and terrible and clean move through me. Grief, yes, but also the absolute end of illusion. No one in that room could tell me now that Claire had merely misunderstood, overhelped, or stumbled too far out of stress. She had told us exactly who she believed she was, and exactly what she thought I owed her. The week after I barred Claire from my home, I updated my will. Not in anger. That matters to me now, and it mattered then. Rage is hot, immediate, and often satisfying in the moment, but it is not a sound architect. I had spent enough weeks watching emotion used as camouflage for strategy. I did not intend to answer manipulation with chaos of my own. If I was going to redraw the boundaries of my life, I wanted to do it with a clear head, a legal pen, and no illusions left in the room. Daniel came by on Monday morning with 2 folders and a seriousness I had come to find comforting. Rachel sat in with me at my request, though not as a decision maker, just as my daughter. The one who had not once asked what any of this meant for her financially. Denise had taken me through my therapy exercises that morning and left me in one of those clear, tired states where the body is honest and the mind often follows. Daniel spread the documents across my dining room table and said, "Today is about protection, not punishment." I nodded. "Good. Then we are of one mind." He smiled faintly at that. We began with the house. Walter and I had owned it outright for years. The mortgage had been paid off 3 summers before he died, and I still remembered the bottle of cheap champagne he opened on the back porch. Because, as he said, a debt-free roof deserves bubbles. That house was not just square footage and resale value. It was my history. It was where I learned to live as a wife, then as a mother, then as a widow. It was where Walter's laugh had once filled the kitchen, and where I had cried into my apron after both girls left for college, and the silence felt unbearable. It was perhaps most importantly now the physical site of my autonomy. Daniel recommended placing the property in a trust structure with clear instructions for my care, occupancy rights, and future distribution. The trust would ensure that no hurried persuasion, no future injury, and no manipulative paperwork could easily pry the house away from my control again. "Do it," I said. Rachel looked at me with quiet approval, but no surprise. She had understood before I had that sentiment alone would not guard me. Paper had to do that now. Next came healthcare directives and durable legal protections. Daniel walked me through each line carefully, perhaps more carefully than he had ever spoken to me before. Not because he thought I couldn't follow, but because he wanted every future claim of confusion dead on arrival. I appreciated that. He made me say in my own words what I wanted. Who had access? Under what circumstances? What would happen if I needed more intensive care later? What would not happen under any circumstances unless I approved it while demonstrably competent? At one point, he asked, "Do you want Claire removed entirely from future contact authority and emergency notifications?" The question stayed between us for a moment. Rachel looked down, not wanting to influence me. That, too, I appreciated. I thought carefully before answering. "Yes," I said, "for now." Daniel nodded and made the notation. For now. That phrase mattered. Not because I owed Claire softness, but because I wanted my decisions to reflect principle, not drama. I was drawing consequences, not staging a revenge fantasy. Then we came to the will itself. My old will had been simple. The estate, after specific smaller bequests, would be divided evenly between Claire and Rachel. A portion went to my church, a modest sum to a literacy charity Walter liked. There had been no reason to complicate things when I believed love and decency still lived, however imperfectly, between my daughters. Now there was reason. Daniel placed a revised draft in front of me. "You have options," he said. "You can disinherit entirely. You can reduce. You can condition. You can create delayed structures. The law allows a great deal so long as your intent is clear and properly documented." I looked down at the page but did not read immediately. For a moment, I imagined what some people would advise. Cut her off. Remove her completely. Let the will deliver the punishment she earned. Let her learn too late what greed cost her. The temptation was real. I won't lie about that. There is a fierce satisfaction in imagining justice arriving with finality. But another thought rose beside it. What do I want this decision to say about me, not about Claire? About me. I had no interest in pretending she had done little. I had no interest in rewarding betrayal. But I also did not want my final legal act toward my daughter to be fueled entirely by injury. So I chose something more difficult. I want Claire's share substantially reduced, I said. Not erased. Reduced. Rachel looked up, then surprised. Daniel asked, "Do you want to explain your reasoning for the record?" "Yes." He clicked on a small recorder he had brought for documentation with my consent, and I spoke clearly. I am reducing my daughter Claire Bennett's inheritance because she violated my trust, used my resources without permission, attempted to position herself for control over my affairs, and treated my vulnerability as leverage. I am not removing her entirely because I do not want this document to be an act of vengeance. I want it to reflect accountability, protection, and the possibility if she chooses to become someone different of moral consequence rather than pure erasure. Daniel nodded once and turned off the recorder. Then I added the conditions. Claire's remaining portion would be held not released outright. Any restoration of part of the reduced share would depend on documented restitution of what she had improperly taken, sustained therapy, and a meaningful period of respectful conduct verified over time. If none of those conditions were met, the withheld portion would instead flow elsewhere. Where Daniel asked, I already knew. There was a women's recovery and housing center in Durham that Walter had quietly donated to for years. I had only learned the full extent of it after his death, when the director wrote me a note saying my husband believed no woman should ever have to barter her dignity for shelter or safety. I had cried over that letter for an hour because it sounded exactly like him: practical kindness, no performance. I told Daniel I wanted part of the estate directed there. Rachel smiled through sudden tears. Dad would love that. So do I said. Another portion, Daniel suggested, should be reserved more explicitly for my long-term care, so that no future dependence on either daughter could ever again be framed as sacrifice in search of payoff. That recommendation struck me as wise. Protection was not only about punishment after betrayal. It was about designing a future that left less room for exploitation. So we built it. A care fund, a protected house, clear directives, restricted access, conditional inheritance, a charitable bequest rooted in dignity instead of bitterness. By the time we finished, the papers on the table looked less like fallout and more like architecture. Rachel sat quietly for a long time after Daniel left. Then she reached across the table and touched my hand. You know I didn't say that in the meeting, hoping you'd change anything for me, right? I squeezed her fingers. I know, she swallowed, looked down, then back up. I also need you to know I'm okay with this, whatever you decided, even if that meant leaving everything to charity. I smiled tiredly. That may be the first thing anyone said this month that didn't make me want to lock up the silver. She laughed then softly, and the sound lightened the room. But later, after she went upstairs to take a work call, and Denise arrived for the afternoon medication check, I sat alone in the kitchen and let the decision move through me. I had altered the shape of my family on paper. That sounds colder than it felt. In truth, it felt solemn. Not triumphant, not cruel. Like closing a gate not because you hate the person on the other side, but because they have already trampled the garden twice and are still asking for a key. There was grief in it, of course. To revise a will against your child is to admit something has gone terribly wrong in the story you once imagined for your old age. Mothers are not raised on narratives in which they must legally defend themselves from daughters they once dressed for first grade and kissed goodnight under glow-in-the-dark stars. But there was relief, too. For the first time since my fall, I could see a future in which my needs would not automatically become someone else's bargaining chip. That mattered. So much of womanhood, especially for women my age, had been sold to us as self-erasure with prettier language. Be accommodating. Be grateful. Keep the family together. Don't make things worse. Don't be hard. Don't be suspicious. Don't embarrass anyone. And by the time many of us realize what those instructions have cost, we are already old enough for younger people to mistake our silence for consent. I was finished with that mistake. The will was not revenge. The trust was not revenge. The conditions were not revenge. They were a declaration written in legal language, yes, but also in moral one. You do not get rewarded for violating me. You do not get to call exploitation help. You do not get to reduce me to an aging body with assets attached. And because I was not interested in becoming cruel in response to cruelty, I left one narrow door open. Not to my accounts, not to my house, not to automatic forgiveness, just to the possibility that accountability, if ever chosen honestly, could still matter. That was the difference between punishment and justice. Punishment asks only how to hurt back. Justice asks how to protect what must never be handed over again. By sunset, the signed copies were in Daniel's possession, the originals stored properly, and the old version of my future had been replaced. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a teacup when I caught my reflection in the darkening window. I looked older than I had 3 months earlier. But I also looked for the first time in a long while unmistakably like the owner of my own life. The strangest thing about peace is how suspicious it feels when you've been living inside tension for too long. For the first week after the meeting, I kept expecting the next blow. A furious voicemail, a legal threat she could not actually support, a surprise appearance at the door, another round of calls to relatives painting herself as the abandoned daughter of a cold, manipulated old woman. Some of that came in smaller forms, 2 hostile emails forwarded straight to Daniel, one from Claire and one from her husband, both indignant and full of words like overreaction and undue influence. Daniel answered them with such crisp, bloodless professionalism that I almost laughed when I read his draft. The effect was immediate. The noise quieted, and in the space left behind, something unexpected began to happen. I got better. Not overnight. Not in some miraculous made-for-television surge of strength. Healing at my age is humbler than that. It comes in increments small enough to insult your impatience. A steadier step down the hallway, less pain getting in and out of bed. The ability to stand at the kitchen counter long enough to chop celery without having to sit halfway through. But those small improvements add up, and soon enough you realize the body you feared had betrayed you is simply asking to be treated with honesty. Denise helped more than I can properly explain. Professional care has a dignity to it that family guilt often does not. Denise never made me feel like a burden disguised as a duty. She arrived on time, checked my blood pressure, supervised the exercises from physical therapy, adjusted the ice wrap on my hip, and wrote everything down with a calm efficiency that never felt like ownership. If I said I was tired, she believed me. If I said I wanted to try something alone first, she let me. If I succeeded, she nodded. If I needed help, she helped. No sighing, no emotional ledger, no implied debt. One morning, about 3 weeks after the family meeting, I made it from the kitchen to the back porch without my cane. Denise saw it happen and only smiled. "You're stronger than you think," she said. "No," I answered, stepping carefully into the April sunlight. "I think I'm finally getting accurate information." She laughed at that, and for a second, I heard a version of myself I hadn't heard in months, dry amuse still intact. Rachel stayed longer than she'd originally planned. At first, she worked remotely from my guest room and told her office she was helping with the family transition. She said it in that quiet Rachel way that gives people no theatrical openings. Later, when things settled, she began going back to Richmond during the week and returning on weekends. The rhythm worked better than I expected. We did not become clingingly inseparable just because Claire was gone. That would have been another kind of overcorrection. Instead, we began learning each other again as adults, without the old family static always humming in the background. It surprised me how much gentleness there was in that relearning. Rachel and I had loved each other all along, of course. But there are forms of love that sit so long under strain that you stop examining the ways they've adapted. With Claire out of the daily picture, I began to see how much Rachel had edited herself over the years in order to avoid becoming another battlefield. She was not distant by nature. She was careful. There is a difference. One Sunday afternoon, while we were folding towels in the den, I said as much. "You were never less loving," I told her. "You were just quieter." Rachel smoothed out a washcloth before answering. Quiet felt safer. The words hurt, though, not because they were new, because now I was finally capable of receiving them whole. "I'm sorry," I said. She looked up. "I know. No lecture. No bitterness. Just that." "I know. Sometimes forgiveness enters a room before you think you deserve it, and if you are wise, you do not swat it away out of shame." The house itself began to breathe differently, too. I noticed it one evening while watering the fern on the front porch. Nothing dramatic had changed. The same white trim, the same creaking third floorboard in the hallway, the same blue bowl by the sink where I tossed keys and hairpins and the occasional cough drop wrapper. But the air inside the place no longer felt watched. I could leave a bank statement on the table without feeling the need to hide it under a placemat. I could answer my own phone without hurrying. I could sit in silence without worrying that silence itself would be interpreted as weakness. Safety, I realized then, is not merely the absence of danger. It is the return of ordinary behavior. And then, just when I had stopped scanning every day for the next act of damage, Claire wrote to me. Not a text, not an email fired off in rage. A letter, an actual letter in my mailbox in her handwriting. I stood in the kitchen holding the envelope for a long time before opening it. Rachel was upstairs on a work call, and Denise had left 10 minutes earlier. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator motor clicking on and the faint tapping of rain against the back windows. My name was written on the front in Claire's neat, slanted script. Margaret Ellis, not Mom. That hurt more than I expected. I sat at the table and opened it carefully, as though the tone of the paper might tell me what kind of daughter had written it. The letter was 3 pages long. The first paragraph was stiff, defensive in that old familiar way. She wrote that she knew I probably didn't want to hear from her, and that she understood why. She said she was not asking for money, not asking to come back, not asking me to change anything legally at this time. The phrase caught my attention. It sounded like Claire still trying to negotiate optics even on paper. But then somewhere in the middle of page 1, the tone changed. Not beautifully, not elegantly. Claire had never been elegant with truth. Just honestly. She admitted she had been angry long before my fall. Angry that her marriage felt hollow and expensive. Angry that she had built a life around being needed and was discovering that being needed was not the same as being loved. Angry that she had debts she was ashamed of. Angry that watching me grow fragile had awakened something mean in her fear, envy, and panic all knotted together. She wrote, "I think I started seeing your life as something I might need to survive my own." I read that sentence 3 times. Then I kept going. She admitted she had told herself stories to make what she was doing feel less ugly. That she was only borrowing, only planning, only being practical. That Rachel would never understand because Rachel had never had to be the one in the trenches. That if I was eventually going to need more help, then maybe she was simply getting ahead of what everyone else was too sentimental to face. Then she wrote the first sentence in months that felt stripped of performance. "I know now that I turned your weakness into permission." I lowered the pages and stared at the rain on the windows until the words blurred. The letter was not perfect. It was not the kind of apology people write in movies when the music swells and every sentence arrives polished by revelation. Claire still circled herself too often. She still explained more than she confessed. She did not yet fully grasp the scale of what she had done. But she had at last named something real. Not stress, not misunderstanding, not family tension. permission. She ended by saying she had started therapy, that she did not expect me to believe her right away, that she knew trust would not come back because she felt terrible for a few weeks. And then, in the last line, she wrote, "I do not know if there is a way back, but for once, I am not writing to tell you what you should do. I am only telling you the truth as best I can." I sat with that letter for a long time. When Rachel came downstairs and saw it in my hand, she stopped halfway to the kitchen. "From Claire?" I nodded. "Bad I thought about that." "No," I said slowly. "Not bad." She sat across from me and waited while I handed it over. Rachel read the whole thing in silence, then placed it back on the table with more care than I expected. "Well," she said at last. That one word carried everything: caution, surprise, skepticism, and the smallest possible opening. I looked at the letter again. It did not erase the bank charges. It did not erase the realtor call. It did not erase the power of attorney packet, the public humiliation, the sharp words about Walter, or the look in Claire's eyes when she realized my accounts were no longer hers to reach. But it did something else. It cracked the frozen image I had of her at the dining room table, furious, entitled, cornered, and allowed in the possibility that underneath all that rot, there might still be someone capable of seeing what she had become. That is not the same thing as forgiveness, and it is not the same thing as restoration. But it is how healing sometimes begins, not with trust, not with embrace, but with one honest sentence, where there used to be only strategy. That night, after Rachel went to bed, I placed Claire's letter in the drawer beside my chair instead of in the file Daniel kept for documentation. I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe because some truths belong to the law, and some belong to the heart, even when the heart has not decided what to do with them yet. I agreed to meet Claire in the public garden behind the art museum on a Thursday morning in May. I chose the place for reasons that had nothing to do with beauty, though it was beautiful. The roses were just beginning to wake up, and the brick paths still held the softness of spring rain. But beauty was not why I picked it. I picked it because it was public quiet and neutral ground. No one could slam a door there. No one could loom over me in my kitchen or pace across my living room as if my house were still a stage for their grievances. Out there under open sky, everything would have to stand on its own. Rachel knew where I was going when I was going and what bench I planned to sit on. She offered to come and wait nearby. I refused at first, then accepted the compromise we both preferred. She would drop me off, drive to a coffee shop 2 blocks away, and keep her phone on loud. Denise, when I mentioned the meeting the day before, looked at me for a long moment and said, "Are you hoping for reconciliation, Mrs. Ellis?" I had thought about that all night. "No," I said finally. "I'm hoping for clarity." She nodded as though that were an answer she trusted. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. Not formally, just deliberately. A soft blue blouse, cream slacks, low shoes, stable enough for the path. I brushed my hair twice, put on lipstick, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. I wanted to look like myself. Not fragile, not defiant in some theatrical way, just unmistakably myself. When Rachel dropped me at the garden gate, she touched my hand before I opened the car door. "You don't owe her anything today," she said. I smiled faintly. "That may be the most useful sentence you've given me all month." She squeezed my fingers. "I've been saving my best material." I laughed, got out, and walked slowly toward the bench near the fountain. Claire was already there. That unsettled me more than it should have. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, posture straight, looking not dramatic this time, but smaller somehow. She wore a gray cardigan and no visible makeup. The wind moved a few loose pieces of hair near her face. When she saw me, she stood immediately. For one fleeting second, I saw the child she had once been, the little girl waiting to know what tone her mother would use. Then the woman returned. "Thank you for coming," she said. I sat down before answering. "I'm here." She waited until I nodded toward the other end of the bench before sitting again. There was distance between us. Not hostile. Earned. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fountain trickled behind us. Somewhere farther down the path, a couple walked a little terrier in a red harness. A bird landed, then hopped once, then vanished into a hedge. Ordinary life moved around us mercifully, uninterested in the ruins and repairs of our family. Claire was the one who broke the silence. I almost didn't ask to meet. Why did you? She looked down at her hands. Because I was afraid a letter was easier than a face. That was honest enough that I said nothing. She drew in a breath. I've gone to 6 therapy sessions. I waited. I know that doesn't prove anything. No, I said. It doesn't. She nodded once, as though that was fair. I've also started separating my finances from David's mess. And I met with someone about debt counseling. Her voice faltered slightly, not from performance this time, but from discomfort. I'm not saying that so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm saying it because for the first time in a long time, I'm trying not to lie to myself about the shape of my life. I looked at her, then really looked. She seemed tired in a different way than before. Less theatrical, less sharpened by grievance. More like someone who had been forced to see a room with the lights on after preferring dusk for years. That's good. She seemed tired in a different way than before. Less theatrical, less sharpened by grievance. More like someone who had been forced to see a room with the lights on after preferring dusk for years. That's good, I said. Claire's mouth trembled once quickly controlled. I don't know if I've ever actually said this plainly, so I'm just going to say it. I felt my whole body become still. I am sorry. The words were simple. No ornament, no explanation attached, no immediate pivot toward her own pain. So, I let them sit. She swallowed. I'm sorry I used your accounts. I'm sorry I spoke about you like you were a burden. I'm sorry I tried to control things I had no right to control. I'm sorry I turned taking care of you into something ugly. My throat tightened, but I didn't interrupt. Claire looked out toward the fountain rather than at me now. And I'm sorry for what I said about Dad. That was cruel, and I knew it when I said it. That one nearly undid me. For a moment, I could not speak. Walter had always been the quietest center of our family. Even at the end, when illness had hollowed him out physically, he carried a steadiness that made the rest of us feel less likely to splinter. Hearing his name used as a weapon by our own daughter had wounded me in a place deeper than money, deeper than property, deeper even than control. When I finally answered, my voice came out lower than I intended. Yes, I said. It was. Claire nodded, eyes still fixed ahead. I know. There was another silence then, but not the same silence as before. This one held pain without scrambling to escape it. After a while, she said, I kept thinking if I could just explain how overwhelmed I was, maybe it would make what I did less monstrous. I turned my head and looked at her profile. Did it? She let out a small, broken laugh. No. Good. That made her look at me. I held her gaze. Because being overwhelmed may explain your exhaustion, I said. It does not excuse your choices. She nodded slowly. I know that now. Do you? A flicker of hurt crossed her face, but she did not lash out. That mattered. Yes, she said. Or at least, I'm starting to. I folded my hands in my lap and considered the woman beside me. My daughter, my betrayer, my child, my wound, my history, my uncertainty. Motherhood is unbearable sometimes because no matter how much harm an adult child causes, some part of your memory keeps trying to hand you a younger version of them in self-defense. I remembered Claire at 9 asleep in the back seat after a school field trip, one shoe missing, face sticky from melted candy. I remembered Claire at 16 furious about a math teacher she thought had underestimated her. I remembered Claire at 33 sobbing in my kitchen, after her first marriage cracked open. I remembered Claire at my dining room table telling me she had thought the house should count for something. All of those women sat beside me now, layered together. I need you to hear me clearly. After her first marriage cracked open. I remembered Claire at my dining room table telling me she had thought the house should count for something. All of those women sat beside me now, layered together. I need you to hear me clearly, I said. She straightened slightly. Okay, nothing changes today. The words hit, but she didn't flinch away. Your access does not return. The will stays as it is. The house stays protected. My accounts stay sealed from you. And trust, real trust, does not come back because you wrote one honest letter and said you're sorry on a bench. Claire closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. I understand. I'm not finished. She nodded. You do not get to cry your way past consequences. You do not get to use therapy as a coupon. You do not get to announce a better heart and demand immediate credit. I let the words land one by one. If there is ever a different relationship between us, it will be built by years, not tears. That last sentence trembled in the air between us. Claire inhaled shakily. That's fair. I studied her face, looking for the old reflex, the indignation, the pivot, the wounded performance. It flickered once very faintly, then passed. In its place was something raw. Loss, perhaps. Or the first real understanding of what she had destroyed. She looked down at her hands again. I don't expect you to forgive me now. That's good. Her mouth twitched in a sad, almost smile. I probably don't deserve that either. No, I said honestly. Not yet. We sat quietly after that. The odd thing was once the necessary hardness had been spoken, something gentler entered the space. Not reconciliation, not even comfort, but the possibility of talking without immediate warfare. Claire told me her therapy was bringing up old resentment she hadn't named honestly before. I told her naming it late did not make it new. She said David had moved into a short-term rental while they decided what would happen with their marriage. I said I was sorry her life was difficult and meant it without mistaking difficulty for innocence. At one point, she asked very quietly, "Is the door completely closed?" I thought about that for a long moment. Then, I answered with the most truthful thing I had. No, I said, but it has a lock now. And I'm the one holding the key. She absorbed that without protest. I stood a few minutes later, slower than I used to, steadier than I had been months ago. Claire rose too, but she didn't reach for me. That restraint mattered more than 100 emotional speeches. Thank you for meeting me, she said. I nodded. As I turned to leave, she said, Mom. I stopped, but didn't turn around immediately. When I finally did, her face was open in a way I had not seen in years. I really am sorry. This time, I believed she meant it. Not enough to restore anything. Not enough to hand back trust. Not enough to dissolve the legal boundaries that now protected me. But enough to be heard. I nodded once, then prove it by how you live. And I walked away. Rachel was waiting in the car just beyond the gate, one hand draped over the steering wheel, eyes scanning for me the second I appeared. Scanning for me the second I appeared. When I got in, she looked at my face, searching. Well, she asked. I buckled my seatbelt and stared out at the garden for a second before answering. She apologized. When I got in, she looked at my face, searching. Well, she asked. I buckled my seatbelt and stared out at the garden for a second before answering. She apologized. Rachel was quiet. And I didn't rescue her from the consequences. A slow smile spread across Rachel's face, not gleeful, not petty, proud. That sounds like you? I smiled faintly and looked down at my hands in my lap. The same hands that had once signed birthday cards and school permission slips and casserole recipes passed to neighbors over back fences. The same hands that had signed new trust documents, revoked access, and held the edge of the table while my daughter told me who she thought I owed her life to. The same hands that now rested finally under my own authority. Age had not made me powerless. Injury had not made me powerless. Love had not even made me powerless. Silence had. And once I found my voice again, once I stopped confusing boundaries with cruelty and protection with shame, something fundamental changed. I did not win because Claire suffered. I did not win because I cut her out. I did not even win because the paperwork now favored my safety. I won because I remembered that being a mother does not require becoming available for harm. I won because the house was mine again, but more than that, so was my judgment. So was my future. So was the right to decide what love could and could not ask of me. As Rachel drove us home, the afternoon sun laid itself warmly across the dashboard, and for the first time in a very long time, the future did not feel like a room other people were arranging without me. It felt uncertain still, but clean. And that at my age is its own kind of healing. There is something I want to say before I leave you with this story. Growing older does not mean becoming less worthy of dignity. Needing help does not mean surrendering your judgment. And loving your family does not mean handing them permission to wound you without consequence. For a long time, I think women like me were taught that endurance was the same thing as goodness. That keeping the peace mattered more than telling the truth. That if the hurt came from your own child, you were supposed to absorb it quietly and call that love. I don't believe that anymore. What I learned is this: boundaries are not cruelty. They are the language self-respect uses when love has been mishandled. Protecting yourself is not revenge. It is wisdom. And motherhood does not require blindness. You can grieve what your child became in one season of life and still refuse to let that grief destroy what remains of your own. I also learned that not every strong woman is loud, and not every quiet woman is weak. Sometimes the deepest love is the one that doesn't perform itself. Sometimes the most important voice you recover is your own. And sometimes healing does not begin when the other person changes. It begins when you finally decide you are no longer available for harm. If you are in a season where someone you love is testing your peace, your dignity, or your trust, I hope you remember this: you are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect what is yours. You are allowed to be kind without becoming easy to use. And no matter your age, it is never too late to reclaim your voice. If this story stayed with you, please tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to set painful boundaries with someone in your own family? And where are you watching from today? And what time is it where you are? I always love reading that. If stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me for more.